The Horrors of the Backrooms, Part 2. It's been about 3 months since my whole incident with the Expanse. I had been seeing my new therapist, Tiffany, for pretty much that entire length of time. She was on the younger side and had only really been working in the field for a few years. But she seemed to know what she was doing and actually listened to me. I told her a lot of stuff and experiences in my life up to that point, but I mostly veered away from the topic of the Expanse. Wasn't trying to get myself committed. I don't really know how that whole thing works. Just feels like the more I went into it, the better the chance I would have of her thinking I was legitimately insane. Hyperbole aside, though, I just thought it would be better for the both of us if I didn't bring it up much. That is, until one day she insisted that I talk about it. She wasn't authoritative necessarily, but said everything she could to guarantee I would feel okay with going into detail about it. After all, me trying to tell others about it is why I was here in the first place. Alex, you can trust me. I'm here to help you, not judge you. If I was, then I wouldn't be in this chair, she said softly, leaning forward in her chair and looking at me with almost maternal instinct. I won't force you to talk about anything, but I promise you don't have to feel like a prisoner in your own mind. I'll bet I can relate a lot more than you might think. I perked up upon hearing that last sentence, my eyes shifting in her direction with a look of intrigue and curiosity. She returned the eye contact before delivering a slight smirk, confirming her implication. You're not serious, I accused. Listen, I get you want to help me, but you don't have to lie to do it. This isn't necessarily the most professional of me, and I really shouldn't say this, but that place you're talking about, it's not as insane as you might think. I believe your story, every word of it. She continues, suddenly stopping her hand gestures as she waits for my response. I really don't appreciate you making a joke out of my experience, I snarled. You're supposed to be helping me. You're supposed to be different than all the other people who won't listen and ridicule me. I'm nothing but a punchline to everyone, even before any of this happened. After my little fit, I then got up out of my chair and began to walk to the door, only to be stopped when she announced something that made my heartbeat nearly cease upon hearing it. The thing with all the legs, came her calm assertion. I turned, looking over to her with wide eyes and mouth slightly ajar. I had never told her about the creature, not once. In fact, I hadn't told anyone about it, let alone any of its anatomical features. So I stood there, looking like a complete moron while she got out of her chair and approached me. Taking a quick glance to her left at a long curtain on the side of the room with no windows and then directly back at me. It tried to kill you, didn't it? She inquired rhetorically. It tried to kill me too. Still, I stood there stunned, not even knowing how to form words for a response. Alex, you gotta believe me. I'm sorry if you thought I was trying to discredit you. That wasn't my intention. But I know what you're talking about. And I know you're not the only person who's gone through this. Now, will you please sit and finish our session? I don't want you leaving this room upset. She kept her gaze locked hard on me, and I took a deep breath, internally kicking myself for not keeping my cool when I had always been a person who prided myself on doing just that. So with a bit of hesitance, I turned and headed back over to my chair, sitting back down and cupping my hands together as I waited for her to continue speaking. How did you get in? Like, how did you get there? She asks, a sympathetic undertone present in her voice. It took me nearly a full minute to answer despite knowing precisely what I wanted to say. But Tiffany's body language gave me no doubts that she was entirely prepared to listen. A wall, I croaked out. This wall in my basement, it was like it wasn't even there. Like things could just go through it. It was so weird. I've only seen things like that in video games. This didn't seem to shock her, not in the slightest. Instead, she only nodded slightly while staying silent, allowing me to elaborate. My parents wouldn't listen to me. I tried telling them about it, but they never wanted to hear it. All I know is that I wanted some proof, so I could show someone who would do something about it, or at least someone who would believe me. How did you feel while you were in there? She asked, prompting me to take another several seconds of silence as I thought of my reply. I really don't know to explain it. It's not a feeling you can describe. I don't think anyone's felt it. Besides you, is there any chance you could tell me about what you saw in the walls? I solicit, only to prompt a look of hesitance from Tiffany. This is about you, Alex, not me. I'm here to hear your story, not to tell you mine. She rebuts, cupping her hands together. I know you are, but I want to hear yours. Maybe, just maybe it'll help me be able to find some closure with mine. I fire back, more insistent than previously. I just want to know there's someone else out there who understands. Tiffany exhales, looking to both her right and her left, only to return her gaze back over to me as silence swallows the room. I knew that in the back of her mind she did want to tell me that despite her training and education, she was still human at the end of the day. Screw protocols, screw procedures, screw all of it. Just please tell me. I beg. Leaning forward in anticipation, Tiffany keeps eye contact with me. Still appearing unsure about her next move, I widen my eyes and let her know just how desperate I was to hear about her experience. Okay? She sighs, still hesitant. I was 10, it was my birthday, and my mom had invited several of my friends over to the house to celebrate. My dad had taken me out to the shed in our backyard so he could grab tools to finish working on my birthday present. He refused to tell me what it was until it was finished. You see, my dad never really let me into the shed very much, not unless I was close to him. Said he didn't want me messing with grown-up stuff in there, stuff that could hurt me. She paused, allowing me to interject with a question. What was your dad's job? I inquire, surprisingly prompting her to smile. He was a carpenter. He was always very good with his hands. Tiffany trails off, an expression of guilt creeping onto her face. Alex, are you sure you want me to do this? It just doesn't feel right. Yes, I need this. Okay. Well, we went into the shed, and it was a very small shed. Could barely fit 3 people inside there at once. And yet, there was a door on the opposite end of the entrance door. It looked like it would lead you somewhere in the back of the shed, but there wasn't any more physical structure behind it to give the door a real purpose for being there. It was about as pointless as a window on the floor. Dad grabbed some of his tools, and I just kept staring right at that door the whole time. I had seen it a couple of times before, but on this particular occasion, I just really wanted to know why it was there. So I asked him. He told me he was going to add on to the shed and that he wanted to have the door built ahead of time. Of course, me being 10 with not much comprehension of how carpentry works, I took that answer at face value. Yet there was also this part of me that felt like he wasn't telling the whole truth. After the party was over that night and I had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I laid awake all night thinking about that door. I don't know why. Even at the time, I knew it was an odd thing to focus on. Nonetheless, it didn't leave my mind. I tossed and turned. I had a long day with a lot going on, and yet I was still wide awake. And it was all because of that damn door. There were another few brief moments of silence as Tiffany turned to look at that curtain on the side of the room again, causing me to do the same as she started speaking once again. At one point, it got to be too much. I was just way too curious about something so mundane. Like I said, I don't know why, but I got out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way out to the shed. I made sure to not wake Dad up, not even sure how long I would have gotten grounded for if I ended up getting caught. I make it to the shed regardless and walk over to the door, and with the only other sound in the immediate area being crickets, I was able to hear something on the other side of it, which logically should have just been more crickets. But it wasn't. Instead, it sounded like electric buzzing, if that even makes any sense. Like the buzzing of ceiling lights. Even at that age, I knew that something wasn't right. I recognized the sound from the lights in my school at the time, and I knew there was no reason for me to be hearing it coming from there. I let my curiosity get the best of me, as a lot of kids do. So I opened that damn door, God. I just want to kick myself for even saying it now. But I opened the door and there it was, the expanse. I remember it just like how you described it. Ugly yellow walls, a damp and old-looking carpet, and the buzzing, oh, the buzzing. It was twice as loud now that I had opened the door. I didn't know what to think. I knew that I was scared. Part of me was anyway. But I was mainly in shock. This wasn't possible. I had only seen things like this happening in the cartoons and movies I watched. I told myself I wouldn't go far, that I would only take a few steps inside just to see what the place was, and to make sure it wasn't just my imagination, that I wasn't just dreaming. At first, I honored what I told myself. I only took 3 steps inside before staring at the empty hallway in front of me. The fluorescent lights flickering above only helped to unease me, but my curiosity was overpowering my gut feeling, the feeling that something was wrong, and not just with what I could see. I finally began listening to my instincts at that point, because it wasn't long before I decided it was really time to go, and that I had already overstayed my welcome. When I turned around to go back the way I came, I saw nothing. Just a flat, ugly yellow wall like the rest of them. Any sign of the door being there just up and vanished. I went up to the wall, pushed on it with all my weight, threw myself against it over and over, thinking I'd get some sort of different outcome. But no, I was just a scared little girl trapped in a place I knew nothing about. I banged on the wall and yelled as loud as I could for my parents. Wasn't long before I started to cry in a desperate panic. All I did was stand there, continuously throwing my fists on the wall over and over and begging for my parents to come save me from this place. And it wasn't long before something heard me, something that knew I was invading its territory. I heard it screech when it was coming for me. It was awful. Don't think I've ever heard anything more horrific than the sounds that thing made. It was like someone had put a screaming baby on a distorted megaphone. So I did the only thing I could do at the time. I ran as fast as I could to the right because the screeching was coming from the left. It felt like, I don't know, like I wasn't even moving. I just passed yellow wall after yellow wall. I knew in the back of my mind I was going somewhere, but the rest of me felt deceived. It looked endless and maddening. Eventually, I came to a stop, feeling like I had put enough distance between myself and whatever it was that had been pursuing me. What I felt wasn't just fear. This wasn't looking down a dark flight of stairs or a creepy basement or seeing a spider in your room. No, this was existential on a level I can't put into concrete wording. I still hadn't seen the thing, not up to that point. So I went and hid behind a wall, placed my back against it so softly I couldn't even tell if I had actually made contact with it. It was around 10 seconds when I was able to work up the courage to peek my head over the edge of the wall. I was shaking, holding in sniffles, had silent tears going down my face. I didn't dare make a sound. I couldn't afford to. At first, there was nothing. It kind of looked like something out of one of those old playhouses from the 2000s. Just cold, empty, no life present at all. It was uncanny. Tiffany pauses, inhaling and shifting her gaze over towards that curtain once more, prompting me to finally point it out. "What's going on with that?" I asked as politely as I could. "Oh, nothing important. Just more wall." She laughed off dismissively. For the first time since she started her story, I felt a bit uncomfortable. but I mainly chalked it up to her being invested in what she was saying. So I went back to just listening. There I was, staring down that yellow void until I hear it screech again as it rounds the corner all the way down the hall and spots me peeking. I knew it saw me because we both froze for a second. It's like it wanted me to know that it knew I was there and that my fate was sealed. All those legs. God, those legs. They all moved in this grotesquely perfect unison as it started running towards me. So I turned and bolted, hugging the wall to my left, which was a dead end. Just my luck. Did I mention I don't like spiders? Or really, anything with more than 4 legs for that matter. So it wasn't exactly on my bucket list to encounter a man-sized mutated centipede. Didn't think my little legs could carry me so far and so fast. Everything around me was a blur, like I was on a high-speed rail train or something. But it still wasn't enough. That thing was hot on my tail, and there was a small part of me that knew I couldn't outrun it. I pulled away from the wall to my left, took some turns to try and confuse it. But it knew what I was doing. Probably because everyone who ran from it before tried the same thing and failed. God have mercy on them. I knew it was closing in on me when its footsteps got louder. Death was practically knocking at my door. I still remember how it sounded when it ran. Makes my skin crawl to this day. The yellow walls, the hum buzz of the lights, the old, moist carpet. It made it that much worse, knowing I was probably going to die young in such an alien environment. I wasn't getting out, not alive anyway, or so I thought. She trailed off. You said the wall in your basement was how you entered it, right? The expanse? She inquiries, catching me off guard with the sudden question. Yes. I trail off, unsure of what to say next. Why didn't you try to show anyone? My parents, they built a wall of wood panels in front of it, told me they were tired of my ghost stories and my obsession with that damn wall, so they said they'd get it out of my sight and out of my mind. I think they know there's something wrong with it. Kinda like how your dad did. But they don't want me messing with things I don't understand, or they just didn't want our house to become a government research site. Both seem just as likely. I wish they would at least acknowledge my story as true. Their own son went to this horrific place, survived being attacked by a dangerous monster, and they just pretend like I'm crazy, that I'm just desperate for attention. I hate it, and I almost hate them for it. But they've raised me, fed me, and given me shelter. Maybe one day they'll come to their senses. Tiffany's stare became a bit more cold, as if I had just told her what I ate for breakfast that morning. I hadn't seen her ever look at me like that before now. I didn't like it. It was unsettling, especially considering the gravity and context of what I had just said. Why don't you finish telling me about your experience? We're kind of getting off topic, don't you think? I interject, hoping that she would agree. Right, she began, bringing me a bit of relief. It's about as straightforward as a situation like that could be. I was running from something that I truly couldn't escape in a place I was never meant to be. Eventually, after going for so long, my lungs began to give out. I simply couldn't muster the strength or energy to run anymore, even though I knew I had no choice. And I think that was the worst part of it all, knowing that I couldn't even do the bare minimum of running away to save myself. Sure as hell wasn't going to try and fight that thing. Soon enough, I came to a dead end, boxed in by walls on either side of me and the creature behind me. I somehow mustered the courage to turn around as it closed in. I could have sworn it had even tried to smile at me before it prepared to kill me, like it knew what it was doing was going to make me suffer, and that it was going to take pleasure in the agony of my slow, painful death. But something in me snapped, and I honestly shocked myself when this sudden shouting roar emerged from within me, and I directed it right at the creature. I thought it would be completely pointless, but to my surprise, it hesitated, like it was caught off guard by a violent outburst of what it saw as prey. "Leave me alone! Leave me alone, you stupid, ugly monster!" I shouted while flailing my arms. I noticed that it had been taken aback and I wanted to keep it that way. "You're a stupid, weird, and ugly monster," I continued screaming, baring my teeth to make myself look less docile. It wasn't long before the beast had realized who was really in control, so it began crawling forward again, despite me throwing my various insults at it. I was desperate, saying every nasty thing I could think of as it closed the distance. But like I said, my dominance was short-lived. I wasn't in control any longer, so I tried something else. I proposed a deal. To it. Tiffany then pauses, not even making a sound as she looked at the floor with mannerisms that almost resembled guilt. "What? What did you offer it?" I grilled demandingly. "That's not important, but what is? Is that it spoke to me, told me it was hungry, in this gross, hoarse, and nightmarish voice, like an elderly smoker who had his throat filled with a thick syrup. I didn't even know something that alien could even possess the ability to speak in the first place. Its voice really contrasts with all those horrible screeches it makes, I'll tell you that. But I eventually made it out, found a wall that was darker than the rest, and fell right through. Ended up right back up in... Whoa, wait. What did you offer it?" I said, less patience present in my tone. "And don't say it's not important. I want to know why it let you live." But Tiffany doesn't respond out loud. Instead, she goes looking at that freaking curtain again, giving it an intriguing stare before standing up out of her chair and moving towards it. That's when I decided it was time to leave. "I think this session is over," I pronounced as firmly as I could at the time, only for her entire demeanor to shift once the words left my mouth. I stood up, attempting to go over and grab my cell phone from her table. "Sit," she snarled, giving me a look that said she was not in any mood to argue. "Tell me what you offered it," I erupted, my voice echoing off the walls. She didn't respond yet again, prompting me to lunge for the door. I got my hand on the knob and fumbled turning it, so I threw it on there again, only to be stopped mid-turn by the sound of a click coming from behind me. I already concluded the obvious. "Stop. Turn around slowly. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be," she growled, presumably waving the gun she had pointed at the back of my skull. "You know, I'd rather die than get sent back there," I rebut. "Oh, it won't be that simple. I'll just put a bullet in each of your knees and then throw you in there. So your fate is up to you. Do you want to die slow and painfully, or have a chance of running away for a while?" I put my hands up and slowly turn around, and right there is the sight of Tiffany standing next to the curtain with a Glock in her right hand pointed directly at me. "Good," she muttered, just before reaching with her free hand to grab the edge of the curtain and yank it to the side. And behind said curtain was a door. Just a simple dark red door, like one you'd see in someone's home. That alone isn't usually very sinister, but in this context, it was beyond bone-chilling. I knew what was on the other side of it, and that I didn't have much longer before I ended up there, back in the expanse. "Come here," Tiffany demanded, using her gun to point to the door. With no choice, I did as I was told, marching over to her and stopping just a meter in front of the door, my hands still in the air. "It's hungry. I'm sorry, Alex, but it's hungry," she said, all the sympathy exiting her tone. "When I saw your story, I knew that I needed to find you. So you can kill me to continue to save your own skin. How do you know the creature could even make it out of the expanse? What do you have to fear? It's nothing but an empty threat when you're out here." "Oh, it can," she stuttered. "You see, you got lucky. You fell into a public place where it didn't want to reveal itself by continuing to pursue you. But most people, even those who fall back into reality, aren't so lucky. How would it even know where you are when you're not in the expanse? You don't have to bend to this thing's will. I promise you. But instead of rebutting, she simply waves the gun toward the door, signaling for me to open it and step through. I can't take the risk. I need to look out for myself. People were never meant to discover the expanse, and we're both paying the price for treading somewhere we don't belong. Plus, if I don't hold up my end of the bargain, I'm not the only one in danger. Far from it. This goes beyond just me and you. Seems like you're getting a bit of slack compared to me. I barked back. Hurry up and stop stalling. Tiffany snapped. There's no need to do this. There's got to be another way. I bet you haven't even tried to use that gun on it once. Have you? I said go, Alex, she commanded violently, now moving closer and placing the barrel inches away from my skull. I turned slowly, giving her one last look, a look that told her that I was desperate for her to come to her senses. All I wanted was for her to realize the madness of what she was doing, and that there was a way out. But alas, I was hoping for an outcome that was impossible at that point. So I took a deep breath, looked ahead, and lifted my hand up, guiding it over to the doorknob. You're gonna get what's coming to you, I said, maintaining my forward gaze despite my defeated tone. I then slowly pulled back, the door creaking as it inched across the distance of the floor. My eyes widened as I saw it, the place I thought I'd never see again. All my fight-or-flight instincts went into high alert as soon as I heard the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Everything that happened came right back to me, in a way that made me feel like I never truly left the expanse. It was like getting a greeting from my own personal hell, welcoming me back home. I took my first couple steps forward, the all too familiar but subtle squelch of the moist carpet manifesting as my foot made contact. I felt goosebumps form around my arms and legs. The expanse was a bit cooler than what I had previously remembered. It's for the greater good, came Tiffany from behind. I don't turn around, not at first. But once I hear a heavy slam, I take a look back, seeing nothing but more of the ugly yellow wallpaper. It was just like Tiffany's experience if she was even telling the truth. The door that leads in does not lead out. But just like that, I was right back in the place I dreaded most. But I wouldn't make the same mistakes I did last time. The first thing I wanted to do was begin searching for a wall that I could fall through in order to get out of here. I also wanted to pinpoint wherever the creature might have been, that way I could take steps to avoid it. I needed to keep quiet, to not panic like I did the first time around, and if I was careful enough, I knew I just might survive long enough to make it out once more. I then started walking in a crouched formation, turning right and heading down a corridor that led to a dead end, only to turn and take another left once reaching the end, and immediately feeling off-put by the sight I had laid eyes upon. At the end of the hall was what looked to be a four-way intersection of rooms, which by itself was nothing new. I had seen things like the first time I was here. However, there was a strange, bright light being emitted from something in the opening of the hallway on the right. I kept quiet and glanced around me, looking for any signs of the creature's presence as I considered moving to investigate whatever was causing the disproportionate light effect. And in that moment, I discovered nothing. However, I did hear something that completely threw me off. First, it was a sudden slam, as if a heavy door had been opened and closed in quick succession. Then, that same slam was followed by the sound of footsteps and human voices, both male and female. I turn back and hug the wall to my right for cover and get down as low as I can, getting all the way up to where it ended, and laying on my stomach while peeking over to see whoever these people were. Just in front of the now invisible door were three individuals, all of which looked like they just walked straight out of an episode of some shadowy government conspiracy TV show. There were two women and one man, the three of which were dressed near head to toe in black, with all sorts of body armor and gear to go with it. Each of them held a rifle in their hands with a pistol on their utility belts, along with various other non-firearm weapons like grenades and knives. The man then puts a hand near his left ear, fidgeting with what appeared to be some sort of earpiece for communication, becoming visibly frustrated as he struggled to get it to function properly. Believe me, I wanted nothing more than to run up to them and tell them everything. Tell them to help me find a way out of this godforsaken place and show them the horrors these walls hold, and who was responsible for putting me in here. But I don't think they were there to help, considering the fact that one of them had Tiffany's Glock strapped to their side, with a bit of blood sitting on the side of the barrel. She was nowhere to be found, and I pondered as to whether or not she was dead or incapacitated, but it wasn't long before I got my answer. The body's getting picked up and taken to Site 7. Their director of operations said so, came the man, his voice soft but low in pitch. Why not take it back to Site 12? Then they can feed her to that blue freak they got locked up in there. Rebuts one of the women in a sarcastic tone. He's got a talent for killing, I'll give him that. The other woman chimes in. But man, West wasn't kind to him in the looks department. I bet you've never even seen him fight, the man jokes, smirking as he clutches his rifle. One of the women opens her mouth to form a reply, only to be suddenly cut off by a blood-curdling, ear-shattering screech coming from somewhere to the far left of us. The three of them all immediately snap to attention and raise their weapons, ready for a fight. The creature, it knew we were here, and it was coming. The man quickly lifts a hand to his ear again, resting 2 fingers against it before saying, "This is Agent Creed with Team X5-2. We're at the location and the witness has been terminated and pinged for pickup and disposal. May or may not be cryptid activity present as well. Should we keep moving?" The 3 agents all stood at attention as they received their response, one that I myself was too far to hear coming from the communication piece. I arrived at the conclusion that it was now my time to leave, so I got to my feet as quietly as possible, still hugging the wall as I slowly backed away. I turned and refocused my attention to the corridor, peering down at the intersection and setting my sights on the bright opening to the right. I kept myself in a crouched position as I hastily made my way towards it, the horrid screech of the creature once again echoing through the walls of the expanse. "Down here!" one of the 2 women shouted, immediately making my heart sink as I had hoped and prayed they weren't referring to the hall that I was currently occupying. But of course, my hopes and wants meant nothing here. I immediately picked up speed, which was nothing in comparison to how quickly I began moving after hearing one of those female agents shout in my direction from the end of the hall behind me. "Hey, get back here!" I of course had no intentions to obey her demand. Instead, I broke into a full-on sprint, not taking even a moment to waste on trying to convince them of my situation. I made a mad dash for the intersection as the woman began to open fire. Several bullets whipped by and missed me by mere inches, only causing my adrenaline to skyrocket, making me pump my legs like never before. After what felt like an eternity, I finally made it to the end and made a sudden and hard right turn. The woman had stopped firing at me, but cried out in a fury of both horror and rage. Gunfire then erupted through the walls as I heard the creature's dozens of footsteps as it closed in on the 3 agents. "What is that?" the man shouted, just before letting out an agonizing cry. I didn't dare look back, but all I know is that things likely didn't go his way in the midst of encountering the beast up close. Their screams were haunting, and that coupled with the gunfire and the screeching of the creature made the situation all the more horrible. The sounds of flesh tearing didn't help, but at this point, I couldn't tell who was killing who. It was only when I was more than a couple 100 feet away and my heartbeat slowed to a more reasonable speed had I realized that my surroundings changed significantly. Instead of the soft thumping and squelching of moist carpet, my feet were hitting solid and dry tile. I slowed myself and looked down, only to now see a bright white-tiled floor. It was pretty much what you'd find in your average public school building. And speaking of, when I glanced ahead of me, the hallway was no longer yellow. Instead, the walls to my immediate left and right consisted of tall blue lockers. Above those was a simple white painted slant of wall that ran up into an equally boring and flat tiled ceiling. There was a gap in the lockers on the left wall around 30 feet in front of me, so I went towards it, only to discover that said gap was actually a door. You'd think by now I'd have had my fill on anything to do with those. The door itself was made from a light polished wood, with a tall, vertically thin window running up the middle. I peered into the glass, laying eyes upon a classroom, one that looked to be abandoned. Had I made it out? Had I escaped the expanse a second time by some sheer dumb luck? Number. Because I looked back behind me and saw the way the yellow walls slowly faded into this new structure. The cutoff was sudden and easy to distinguish, dozens of feet of yellow wallpaper suddenly becoming a solid white and stopping right where the blue lockers began. It was obvious that this was a school, or at least an imitation of one, but I wasn't back in reality. I was still in the expanse, but obviously this was some sort of different layer or section. Regardless, I don't know who actually left the encounter alive between those agents and the creature. I couldn't hear anything anymore with the distance I had put between all of them and myself. But I knew whoever survived would come looking for me, and I wanted nothing to do with either. I didn't want to keep standing out in the middle of the hallway and leave myself as an easy target. Part of me was forgetting the creature might not be the only one in here, and the gunfire going on earlier didn't help. So I put my hand on the doorknob and turned it. To my surprise, the door swung open with a slight creak. I stepped in and shut it behind me. I didn't see a lock of any kind, though, so instead I went and pushed a couple of the student desks up against it, hoping it would provide me with just a bit more peace of mind. While I could tell this place was abandoned, most of the supplies and actual material still looked mostly intact, save for the dust and little bits of moisture. Over on what I assumed to be the teacher's desk was a black cover notebook and a mug full of pens and pencils next to it. I went to approach it, only to stop dead in my tracks by the sound of sudden movement taking place just outside the door to the classroom. My heart froze, and I kept still. This movement wasn't a constant, abundant pitter-patter like the creature, and it was far too heavy to be human footsteps, so it had to be something I had yet to encounter. Once the initial terror passed over me, I immediately dropped low and maneuvered my way underneath the teacher's desk, letting my back rest against the thick metallic tower of drawers that doubled as a support leg. I was fully hidden. I knew whatever it was wouldn't be able to see me, and yet it didn't ease my nerves in the slightest. But how could it? Especially when I could pick up the faint yet potent sound of its heavy breaths coming through the door. It was looking through the window in the door, waiting for the slightest noise or hint of movement to occur. I had no idea what this thing even looked like, and I didn't want to. I kept holding my breath despite not needing to. Every second felt like an eternity. I got to a point where I thought my heart would explode, but then I heard its monstrous footsteps once more as its heavy breath faded away, allowing me some emotional relief as I finally exhaled. It was leaving, losing interest after failing to pick up on my presence. I slowly peeked my head around the support of the desk and glanced over at the window of the door, only to see that whatever it was longer there. But I still didn't want to leave the room, not for a while, but I knew I'd have to eventually. I slowly slid out from underneath the desk and stood up, grabbing both a pen and the notebook placed on top of it, before returning underneath the desk. I'm going to write all of this down. I need this to reach someone, somewhere. I need to continue getting my story out there. If you all don't hear from me again, then I guess that means I didn't make it. But this needs to be exposed, and the world needs to know. Be careful where you step, remain cautious of where you go. Because there are fates a whole lot worse than death, and falling into the expanse is one of them. The Horrors of the Backrooms, Part 3. After looking through the classroom a bit more, I discovered an old backpack resting in the corner behind a desk. I picked it up, unzipped it, and looked through all the pouches for anything inside. There wasn't much of note besides dust and crumbs, however. I figured it would be a useful item to have with me, so I kept it with me, returned over to the teacher's desk, and grabbed the notebook and pen I had been using to document events, after which I put them inside and set the backpack's straps over my shoulders, tightening them in the event I needed to move quickly to prevent it from easily falling off. I made my way over to the door before pushing away the desks I had used as barricades, the metal legs scraping against the floor making me visibly cringe. Once they were moved aside, I approached the door, letting my face hover close to the glass as I looked out into the hallway. There was still no sign of whatever it was that had been breathing and making those footsteps, which was good. I needed to take the opportunity to get out of this room and keep moving before it came back. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself before I opened the door. The longer I stayed here, the less I felt like I would be able to escape. But I did it once, and I can do it again. That much was comforting, but not a whole lot. I opened the door, taking my first steps back out into the imitation of a school hallway. It looked no different than before until I looked to the right. Shockingly, the repetitive yellow wall area of the expanse that had led into this school layer was no longer. It was the exact same hallway I had run down when escaping from those mercenaries, soldiers, whatever you'd call them. But instead, at the end of the hall with the blue lockers lining the walls on either side, was just a solid, plain white wall, and it was as smooth as a wall could possibly be. I was now met with another strange element to deal with. The fact that the expanse's layout and features seemed to change periodically without any true pattern or logic. At least I think that was the case, unless I was truly losing my mind. I headed off to the left, turning down another hallway that maintained a consistent design and appearance as the one previously, not to mention the other abandoned classrooms, and even what looked to be a worn-down computer lab, with monitor screens being smashed and cracked, along with some having fallen on the floor. I did give the lab a second glance, keeping a lookout for any computers and monitors that looked intact enough for me to try and use. But it was nothing more than self-amusement at that point, even if there was one in working order. Who's to say it would ever obey the rules of a computer back in reality? After looking around for just a few minutes, I eventually gave up and headed deeper into this school. I pretty much came to terms with calling it that, despite obvious circumstances. Everything I had seen so far had been mostly uneventful, besides the fact of having myself on high alert in case whatever that thing was earlier circled back around. After mindlessly wandering for several more minutes, I eventually came to a staircase leading up to a supposed second floor. The stairs themselves looked unstable and dilapidated at best, with what looked to be rust and rot running along the walls accompanied by cracks with what looked to be weeds growing out of them. OSHA would have a field day with this place. Before going all in, I reached out with my right foot and placed it on the first step, half expecting it to collapse just from that minuscule amount of force. But it held, giving me just enough assurance to take another, and once I felt comfortable enough to begin climbing, I heard something that made my heart skip several beats. I stopped, frozen, as I leaned forward to keep myself out of the line of sight from the stairway entrance. Coming from outside the doorway where the staircase was located was footsteps. Heavy, but slow, and potent footsteps. But not only that, there was the breathing as well. It was just as deep and hoarse as it was unsettling. The creature that was looking for me while I was hiding inside the classroom. It was coming. And there I was, just a sitting duck out in the open. I immediately started to move up the stairs as quietly as I could, skipping multiple steps and placing my feet down as lightly as humanly possible. Luckily, the padding on the bottom of my shoes was able to keep my movement on the quieter side of things, so I was able to be quick without making much noise. But it didn't feel like I was moving fast enough, because every second counted, and with every one that passed, the louder the breathing and the footsteps became. Part of me wasn't even sure if I would make it to the top in time before the creature entered the stairwell. But I kept moving, kept pushing myself because it was quite literally life or death. I was careful, making sure not to throw too much weight on any section of the stairs that looked too unstable. I kept my eyes on what was below me, cautious not to slip up. But just as the breathing had reached the doorframe, I was only on the last few steps, just feet away from the top. I was thanking every god that I could think of that I was going to make it without that thing seeing me. That is, until on the very last step, I slipped, and my foot dislodged a chunk of material from it, sending it crashing down the staircase below me and breaking apart more and more with each step it collided with. The footsteps outside the stairwell suddenly ceased, and so did my movement. I held my breath, turning to look back down at the doorway. The silence was deafening, and I didn't dare move a muscle, not yet. The creature, whatever it was, let out a low, surprised snarl. I could hear it sniffing the air from outside the doorway, and that's when I seized the opportunity to more or less throw myself up to the top of the stairs. I landed as quietly as I could, just before looking up to see more or less a similar layout to the first floor. However, to my right was what looked to be the school library. I could hear the creature as it entered the stairwell and began climbing up at a moderate speed after me. So I turned and made a mad dash into the library to hide as it tailed me, still not getting a look at its appearance. The library itself looked just as abandoned, and as dilapidated as the rest of the building. None of the shelves even had books. But I didn't have time to think about it. I frantically looked around for several seconds, before laying eyes on what looked to be the circulation desk with an office behind it. I could hear that the creature was a little over halfway up the staircase, and I was running out of time to find a place to hide. I quickly made my way around the circulation desk and bolted for the door to the office behind it, praying with every fiber in my being that it wouldn't be locked. I throw my hand on the knob, hearing that the entity was now at the top of the stairwell, its breathing more rapid and almost angry in nature. I turned the knob, only for the door to not budge at all. I tried again and again, finding no more success than my first desperate attempt. So I did the only thing that would save me from becoming a bloody smear on one of these walls. I crouched down and moved up against the desk. The top of it was offset just enough to hide me if the beast were to peek over. Speaking of which, I heard its breathing as it entered the library, its footsteps coming to a sudden stop as it seemed to sniff the air. I thought it was over right there and then, that it would detect my scent and kill me right on the spot. Yet nothing came, didn't stop my life from flashing before my eyes, though. My cheeks were going red from holding my breath as the creature continued to stay idle and scan the library. Moments that felt like years passed, but the thing eventually lost interest, and I heard it turn and exit the library into the hallway from which it came, although it didn't go down the stairs, not according to my ears anyway. I waited for several minutes before I even dared to peek my head out in the open, cautiously lifting myself up and over the edge of the desk to take a look around. I was alone, or at least, my eyes told me that I was. But I wasn't sure if I could even trust that at this point. Needed to keep my head on tight, though. I quickly but quietly climbed over the desk before turning to my left and finding what looked to be an opening to the school gym on the opposite end of the library. And it was either that or going through the same doorway that thing just did mere minutes ago. I made the obvious choice and headed for the gym. It was, of course, dimly lit, or looked to be that way from inside the library. But once I crossed the doorway, I got the full scope of its appearance. It was dilapidated, just as the rest of this place was. That was expected. There were fluorescent lights hanging by a thread from the ceiling. The floor was abundantly cracked and dirty. The basketball hoop's backboards possessed only about half the glass. They should, with the nets also being worn down and hanging halfway off the rim. It was a ridiculously large gym, much bigger than the one my school possessed. So every step I took made me feel like an ant walking across a king-size bed. And despite the fact that I knew I was alone, I couldn't help the feeling of being watched. It made me speed up a bit, as well as taking a couple of glances around me for good measure. But I didn't hear or see anything that moved, and maybe that was the problem. I got just less than halfway across the court. I came upon a certain section of worn-down bleachers that appeared stained with mold, which led all the way up each step until it hit the wall. I took a look at the wall itself, the part that was just above the top step of the bleachers, seeing that there was something written on it in what I assumed to be blood. "Don't go in the water." It only raised more questions than answers, as there wasn't a drop of any actual water in sight. The ominous sentence had made me think about just how many other people had also gotten stuck in this part of the expanse and were never able to tell their stories. Decided it was best to leave the bleachers alone, though. The less of the environment I involved myself with, the better. At this point, I was practically jogging toward the door. There wasn't anything pursuing, nothing that I could hear or perceive in any way. But regardless of that fact, I still wanted to get the hell out of that area. I take one last look back, seeing the doors that I entered through from the library were now connected to what looked to be another dilapidated classroom. The expanse had changed its environment yet again. Part of me had pondered if it was possible or not to actually see the shifts occur. Nonetheless, I made it to the door and threw it open, only to step through and look up like a mesmerized child. This time I found myself in a wide, massive, and empty cafeteria. It was what you'd expect from a public school as far as the general decor and design. The scale of the room itself was a bit large, but not ridiculously so. Seems like every room in here was just slightly larger than it should have been. The long and rectangular dining tables were strewn about, with some being upside down or flipped around in various ways. They were also beaten to hell, with chunks of wood missing from some corners and sides. And that wasn't mentioning the cobwebs strung up in between the seats. And yet, there wasn't a single arachnid or insect to be found. This cafeteria had 2 hallways on either end acting as exits. I opted for the hallway on the left, as I had seen a couple of doors that had looked ajar, but what they actually led to was a mystery from the angle I was at. Everything seemed so lifeless, and yet you were always under the impression that you were not alone. There were still no windows that allowed me to see what might be on the outside of all of this, although part of me wondered if I'd look out and just see nothing but a black void. It had become more than clear to me at this point that I wasn't on Earth anymore. Regardless, I made it to the opening of the hallway and immediately darted into the first open door I saw, reaching behind myself to slowly shut it as quietly as possible. This next room was probably the most normal out of everything I had seen thus far, by the standards of the expanse anyway. It was a simple natatorium. It was on the bigger end of things as far as dimensions, like the rooms before it, but nothing that I hadn't seen in schools back on Earth. And it was surprisingly sterile and intact looking, not nearly as worn and torn as the rest of the building. It had it all: the white and blue tiled floor, the diving boards, the lanes in the pool, and the potent smell of chlorine. Although it was a bit dimly lit, making it difficult to see what was beneath the surface of the water. However, on the edges of the pool were white rectangular signs that on any other pool back in reality would usually list the depth of a particular section. And this pool had those, except they didn't display any numbers or typical units of measurement. Instead, there was just the letter X painted in black ink on each one. I raised an eyebrow before shifting to the edge of the pool and peering over, the eerie silence only furthering tension that shouldn't have been present. Now, pretty much all natatorium pools usually allow you to see the bottom, but this one didn't, not even a little bit. I sat there puzzled as I focused hard and squinted my eyes to locate the floor of the pool. But the harder I tried, the more I only saw just an endless dark blue abyss. It looked to not even have a bottom at all, and if it did, it definitely wasn't anywhere near reasonable enough to swim to. And speaking of, I caught movement in the corner of my eye just as I was about to look away. It came from closer to the right end of the pool, just about where my peripheral vision ended. The depth of the pool was consistent across the entire thing, even where you think it would have, or should have, been shallow. I turned my head to focus in on whatever it was. I squinted, once again spotting the black mass slowly inching toward my end of the pool. It had to be more than 30 feet in length alone, with the width being around 5. 3 months ago, I would have assumed what I was seeing in that moment was nothing more than my eyes playing tricks on me. But now, now I fully accepted that there was something down there, something alive, and probably dangerous. So I did the most common sense thing I could. I turned around and made my way to walk right out of the natatorium. I didn't want to bother sticking around to find out any more information about whatever was swimming around down there. I didn't have the tools to do a damn thing about it anyway. But as soon as I had reached the door and put my hand on the knob, I froze. The breathing, the footsteps. I heard it again, and it was right outside the door. That thing, it was back. And this time, I finally caught a glimpse of its hideous appearance through the glass in the door. The creature wasn't very tall, just under 6 feet by my estimation, but that didn't do anything to take away from its grotesque nature, not even a little. Its body shape resembled that of an overweight human, maintaining a bipedal stance as it walked. Its skin was a sickly gray color, with it looking like it had been forcibly stretched over the bones and muscles of the beast. Its face possessed not a single feature, giving it the appearance of a sheet of metal. Its most disturbing feature, however, was that of the 2 long and thin appendages protruding from its shoulders. They were bent at a near-perfect 90-degree angle about 2 feet out, both of them covered in these disgusting bumps that traveled up the length of the appendages all the way to the bent section. The creature turned its faceless head and pointed it right at the glass in the door. Sure, it had no eyes, but I knew somehow, some way, it could see me clear as day. The breathing was still present and potent as well, despite the lack of a mouth. Everything about it was just wrong, and it was somehow even more horrific and hideous than the centipede creature. To say I was stuck between a rock and a hard place wasn't a stretch. My heartbeat skyrocketed as I thought of what to do, but it wouldn't matter all that much. I had taken too long to act, and it was going to cost me dearly if I didn't find a way out. The beast started moving toward the door, reaching out with those bumpy shoulder legs in order to presumably break it down. I quickly backed up and looked to my left, spotting a lone broom that was laid up against the wall. The creature began to pound on the door with its horrid limbs, and the hinges grew weaker with every blow, which meant my time was running out, and there wasn't anywhere to hide this time. I darted over to the broom, swiping it away from the wall and then breaking the handle over my knee to leave one end sharp, after which I gripped the blunt end with my shaky fingers and held it behind my neck in the stance of a baseball batter. I didn't expect myself to be able to kill this thing, not even close, but if I lured it in, swung at it, and kept it from grabbing me long enough to where I could run around and exit the room, then that would be enough. It was all about whatever I had to do to survive at this point. The creature delivered several more devastating bangs to the door, the last one of which finally threw it right out of the frame and off its hinges, causing it to slide across the floor and into the pool, a small splash manifesting before it sank into the depths. The creature then raises those shoulder appendages as if to tell me it's about to charge, which it did, violently dashing forward at a surprising speed, considering its previous movement patterns. I evaded the beast by strafing to the left, my heart going a mile a minute as I worked up the courage to take a swing at it, landing a harsh blow on the back of its head. The beast retaliated by shooting out its left shoulder appendage straight for my head. I backed up so fast that I nearly slipped and fell as I raised the broom handle to block the attack. It then lunged with its other appendage, so I sidestepped to the right and swung the handle down hard on the limb, hard enough to burst and draw blood from one of the bumps. The liquid itself was gooey and thick, a light gray color that seeped out from the supposed wound I had created. But this little stunt only angered the creature far beyond whatever point it was already at. It turned and charged with its entire mass again, catching me off guard and throwing me right off my feet with a powerful impact into the pool. It happened so fast that I didn't fully comprehend it until I was already several feet underwater, having no time to take a breath or prepare myself. From what I saw when I opened my eyes, the creature itself didn't follow or fall in with me. The water itself was surprisingly warm, but that wasn't even close to enough to make me feel comfortable in my current predicament. I looked down, the black abyss staring right back up at me as I stared down at it. I could barely see my own feet as they were swallowed up by the immediate darkness below me. It was haunting and disorienting, like looking into a giant sinkhole. But unlike this abyss, sinkholes were at least somewhat understood. My lungs began to throb, but I was hesitant to swim up, knowing the beast would be waiting for me at the top. But at least I had a chance against that thing, drowning. Not so much. I did manage to hold on to the broom handle, though. Nonetheless, I quickly made my decision once I looked down to the right side of the pool and saw more movement in the water that was below me. This time I could make out more of its shape. It resembled that of a serpent, but there almost weren't any details that I could get besides that. However, I could make out two brightly colored yellow dots in the depths. There was a couple of feet of distance between them. It was its eyes. They had to be. It saw me, and it was going to be coming right for me. I kicked hard as my lungs filled with water, desperately reaching up for the surface while I swam as hard as humanly possible. Once I broke the surface with a frantic splash, I spit up any water that had entered my mouth and threw my head back to look for the creature. It was gone, vanished from the position it was in when I was thrown into the water. I quickly looked around, left, right, and behind. Nothing. The entity was no longer in the room at all. It brought me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months, not since I landed in the library. I didn't waste any time swimming over to the edge of the pool and pulling myself out with a coughing groan. The entire left side of my body felt as if it had been hit by an SUV, which I guess wasn't too far off. I got to my feet, looking down and spotting a trail of the creature's blood leading from where my feet were planted to the door and into the hallway adjacent to the natatorium. It retreated, but I didn't let myself get a big head thinking it ran because it was scared of me. It probably just thought I had perished. Regardless, though, I knew it would be back. And I needed to move despite me being drenched and dripping wet. I tried to shake my head to get some of the water out of my hair. All my clothes were soaked, and I felt heavy. The smell of chlorine all over me now. The backpack felt 10 pounds heavier, with all the added weight of the water. And I wasn't sure if the notebook I had taken was any good anymore. But I didn't have any time to check at that moment. I paced over to the door and stopped just before actually stepping out to lean forward and look in both directions. The trail of gooey blood had led down the right end of the hall, so I instinctively went down the left, taking the broom handle with me. My footsteps produced a bit of a squelching noise as I made my way down this new section of the school. Part of me considered taking them off in case something heard me. But I knew I was far better off leaving them on. The hallway was what I expected, a narrow rectangular shape with classroom doors on either side, nothing I hadn't seen before. So I continued on to find a place to sit down and regain myself for just a minute before I resumed wandering. There wasn't much to see in this particular area, just more corridors with lockers, doors, and tiled floors spread about. Although after the death-defying adrenaline rush I had earlier, it was certainly a nice change of pace. I kept looking around for any flickering walls or strange doors, as it had been established to be my only hope for an exit at this point. The expanse didn't seem to abide by many rules, but if one thing was consistent, it was that flickering walls were either your worst nightmare or your saving grace. Now that most of my initial shock and existential dread of the expanse had worn off, and mostly turned into general caution, I felt a sense of anger boiling inside me at both myself, the people who never listened to me, and Tiffany. But according to what those agents had said, she had already gotten what she deserved, both for what she did to me and probably countless others. Those armed agents dressed in black were a whole other question. Who were they? What did they want? Who sent them? Was it truly the government or something more sinister? After wandering for who knows how long, I got to a point where I had mostly dried off, giving me an opportunity to stop and take the backpack off in the middle of an empty hall. After unzipping it and reaching inside for the notebook, I was genuinely taken aback at what I saw. It was mostly intact and only slightly wet on both the back and cover. The backpack was heavily water-resistant, apparently. I opened the notebook up, rested my back against the wall on my left, and began to document everything that had taken place since leaving the classroom, all the way up to the chase with the creature and the encounter in the natatorium. It felt beyond cathartic to once again get my story in writing, in a morbid sort of way. There was still the off chance I didn't make it out of here alive for a second time, and I had somehow prepared myself for the fact that all the people who knew me back in the real world may never see me again. Missing persons cases are always haunting and terrible to endure, especially for close family members of the victims involved. But at least when someone goes missing on Earth, there's a chance you could find them. There's trails they leave behind whether they want to or not. There's hope, even if it seems hopeless. But when someone goes missing via falling into the expanse, there's nothing, no trails, and nearly no evidence. Not if you don't see it happen. It makes me wonder how many missing person cases exist solely because of this place. I didn't get much time to ponder on a potential answer, though, as I picked up an all too familiar sound heading my way. The footsteps, the loud, thundering footsteps, and the low, deep breathing. The creature was back and heading my way one last time. It was coming from behind in one of the adjacent halls. I slammed the notebook shut and threw it inside the backpack, quickly zipping it up as I put the straps on my shoulders. After which I reached down and hastily snatched the broom handle, gripping it tightly as I stood back up. I'm sure the fact that I smelled like chlorine only made it easier for the creature to track me down, the beast that could sniff you out without a nose. I prepared myself for the inevitable encounter, gripping the broom handle as I backed up slowly, waiting for the creature to turn the corner and charge me. This thing wasn't going to leave me alone. It wasn't going to give up and go away. It would keep coming for me until I took last my breath, and I had grown sick and tired of doing nothing but running. Running and hiding. I needed to defend myself and take a stand. The footsteps and breathing grew more potent. I held the broom handle behind my back, ready to swing. The creature rounded the corner, roaring in sheer rage and feral aggression. It was an understatement to say that the beast was not happy to see me. I was terrified. I thought about how this would be my potential end, that this thing would kill me and that would be it. But as I said, I was done running. It let out another earth-shattering howl before charging at me, but I wasn't foolish enough to try and block him, so instead I dashed to the side, nearly falling off my feet as I tried to avoid the vicious attack. The creature doesn't waste time following up. It turns and charges again, throwing out the left shoulder limb it possessed and slamming me against the wall, my back stinging as I feel it impact the brick. I quickly take a swing at the creature's head with the broom handle, only briefly causing it to jerk to the side before snapping back as its featureless face stared me down. It raised its other limb up in the air, preparing to slam it down on me, so I quickly raised the broom handle and swatted it away. I followed up by then flipping the handle and shoving it forward, impaling the creature in the abdomen area. It cried out from the gruesome injury, flailing all its limbs around in an animalistic rage as it swatted at me. I backed up to avoid the blows, nearly falling over in the process. I lunged forward and grabbed onto the broom handle before pushing forward on it, letting it impale the creature even deeper, avoiding another incoming swat from the beast's limb. It roars louder than ever before, the lack of a mouth doing nothing to hold back the ear-shattering volumes it could reach. The entity's blood flows out from the wound, coating several inches of the handle as it also runs down the body of the creature. I let go and backed up, watching as it continues to go berserk. But it wasn't done, and it wouldn't go down. Not quite yet. It reached forward and yanked the handle out of the wound, the sound of both its pained growls and flesh tearing being coupled together. Once it's out, the entity then throws the handle several yards behind itself. It lands with a mocking thud on the floor of the hallway, now completely out of reach. The creature then snaps its head at me sideways, and without a weapon of any kind, I didn't stand a chance. So I did the one thing I told myself I was done doing. I ran, wasting no time turning and bolting down the hall, and with the creature now aware of my position, it revealed its true speed, taking off after me as I pumped my legs with adrenaline-induced vigor. The creature practically shook the ground as it chased after me. I fled down to the end of the current hall before making a hard left and heading down another, almost identical one. The creature was hot on my tail, seemingly not slowed down by its wound. I was sweating and panting like a dog as I kept sprinting forward. I thought that I'd be stuck in a mindless chase with this thing, one that would only end in my death once I ran out of stamina. And there was no part of me that was prepared for it. Surviving all of these experiences in the expanse, only to die like this, and become another missing persons case in some random police database. But after looping around one hall and entering what looked to be a second cafeteria, I spotted something that I thought I'd never be so happy to see. On the wall at the opposite end of said cafeteria, there was a section of it that was just a bit darker than the rest and gave off a visually apparent flickering effect. Every bone in my body shrieked with both relief and terror as I felt the beast's presence just mere inches behind me. It was catching up. I had never run faster than I did right then and there, even in my previous escape from the expanse. Humans are capable of some extraordinary things when the threat of death is quite literally looming over them. Once I was only a few feet away from the wall, I threw myself forward, not even thinking about what kind of environment I may have landed in. It was disorienting going through the wall at full speed, but it's not like I had the luxury of being able to slow down. I practically slid across the floor of the room on the other side. I was only given a fraction of a second to take in my surroundings, a completely white, sterile-looking room with not a single stain on its walls that I could see. The creature had entered the room with an explosive entrance, charging and ramming me directly into the wall facing my back, all the wind immediately leaving my lungs as I desperately heaved for a breath. Slumping down to the floor as several objects I didn't visually perceive fell next to me on either side. The monster stood over me while letting out a triumphant cry, raising its left limb and bringing it down with an eruptive force and impaling my leg, going clean through my shin and thigh as I screamed with the volume of a jet engine, scarlet-red blood coating my socks and staining the floor beneath me. I writhed and thrashed around before whipping my head to the right and laying eyes upon a pistol on the floor next to me. I don't know where it came from or how it got there, but all I knew is that it was my saving grace, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it. I clenched my teeth together so hard while reaching over I thought they'd crack. I gripped the firearm, not getting a chance to switch the safety off before the creature twisted its limb within my leg, provoking another horrific scream from my lungs. I quickly slid the safety off and pointed the barrel up at the creature's head, pulling the trigger twice and missing each time, the subsequent gunfire inducing it to thrash itself around and drag me along the floor, only causing me further agony. I really thought that this might be it, that this might be the end. But no, I wouldn't go down like I was nothing more than easy prey. I finally come to a stop after all the thrashing and sliding, getting an opportunity to lift the pistol once more, my hand shaking as I aim and quickly pull the trigger. The bang erupts, and the bullet tears right through the creature's throat, leaving a gaping hole that spewed out the gray blood. Its howls, roars, and cries were now gurgled, and its limb slipped out from my leg, causing me to bleed. Even more, it was nearly a small pool at that point. The creature's legs began to give out. It wasn't even focused on me anymore. It just stomped around before falling forward as it slowly bled, its blood now even mixing with mine as its body landed with a powerful thud. But it took less than a minute for the beast's cries to grow faint while it was on the ground, and soon all movement ceased. And there it laid, finally dead, and no longer able to torment me. But I had a much bigger problem on my hands, one being the fact that I had lost enough blood to cover a mattress. I felt lightheaded, and I struggled to stay conscious. Part of me had wondered if I even made it out of the expanse, or just entered another section of it. That concern was quickly put to rest, though, once I heard an alarm of all things. It blared into the room like it was coming through a PA system. A robotic female voice announcing the sentence, "Level 5 security breach in Armory. All possible agents engage." I managed to turn my head to the left with a groan, seeing that the wall I had been slammed into was lined with dozens of firearms, rifles, handguns, you name it. I laid my head flat on the ground. It started feeling too heavy as I was slipping into unconsciousness. Outside the supposed door to the room were sets of footsteps, ones where you could tell they had on boots and other sorts of gear. A man's voice shouted, saying, "Come on, move it!" "This is a breach, damn it." Didn't have time to hear the rest before everything finally went black. I couldn't tell you how long I was out for, but when I awoke, I was in a sort of medical bed, with various wires and bandaging on my leg. I assumed I had been taken to a hospital, but I don't think most hospitals restrain your hands down to the armrests of the bed when you have a leg injury. I picked up 2 different voices in the midst of conversations, both male and female. I looked around the room for the sources, which itself was lined with several beds on each wall, with corresponding sets of medical equipment. My backpack was obviously gone, most likely confiscated by whoever occupied this place. I'm assuming that I was still in the same building. I darted my eyes to the left, spotting a man and woman of similar height, but differing in their attire. The woman was dressed in a suit and tie, her red hair thrown up in a professional bun. She looked to be in her early 30s. The man, on the other hand, was on the younger side, fitted in black military gear and armed to the teeth with a rifle in his hands. In fact, he was dressed and looked nearly exactly like the agents who had supposedly killed Tiffany and shot at me inside the expanse. "Who are you people? What am I doing here?" I growl, fighting against my restraints with an effort that proved futile in its results. "Seems like the kid's got fight in him, more than the therapist did. He killed that thing we found him with in the armory," came the man, a slight smirk on his face. "Oh, I'm well aware. I reviewed the camera footage," added the woman. "He's a fighter. Can you answer my questions and stop pretending like I'm not here?" I went on, quickly becoming frustrated. "Hey, I'd be a little more grateful to the people who patched you up. Would have been a corpse floating in your own blood if it weren't for us." The woman replies, a surprising warmth to her tone, but I didn't fully trust it. "Trust me, we're treating you a lot better than Site 12 would. If it were up to Ted, you wouldn't be awake right now to complain. The armed man chimes in. I heard of these so-called sights, and I assumed this to be one of them. You see, began the woman, my name is Sandra Locke, and I'm the director of operations around here. As you've seen, our job is not the most ordinary, and you've seen firsthand what we go up against. Hell, you killed a cryptid on your own. With the right training and mental conditioning, you could be a seriously talented field agent. Field agent? I thought. What was this? Recruitment of a kid into some shadowy military faction that kills beings from a mirror dimension? Had my life truly become this absurd in a matter of months? I was at a loss for words, so instead, I stuck to something a bit more tangible and easier for me to comprehend. Where's my backpack? And my notebook? I inquired, unsure of what tone to take at this point, despite me still being angry and confused. It's in our possession now, Sandra posits. So what are you going to do? Destroy it? Make sure to not leave a trace, so then the world never knows what happened to me? I asked rather rhetorically. No, quite the opposite. We want you to finish it. To write everything that has happened since you landed in the library up to now. No one already believes your story, but it'll raise suspicion if someone so hell-bent on exposing what everyone else knows as absurdity all of a sudden vanishes. At least this way, anyone who is stupid enough to take a serious interest will think you left according to your own delusions. I laid there silent, not sure how to respond. But I'll be honest, she made a decent point. One that reinforced what I was in denial about all this time. I tried everything to make people believe me, and nothing came of it. Not a single person came to my aid, even those whose very job was that. This is the first sort of actual hospitality I had received in months, even if there was a catch to it. Not to mention the people around here had experienced things probably crazier than even me. I'd have the comfort of knowing that I'd be surrounded by people who could finally relate to me, even if it was in a pretty bureaucratic setting. You've seen things you're not supposed to, Sandra continued. Now standard procedure would be to terminate you. But you've shown us that you're useful, and I'd much rather get your help than clean your brains up off the floor. I started thinking about my parents. And as much as I had been angry with them for ignoring my concerns, I still loved them. What would they do if I simply up and vanished again? My parents are probably already heading to file a missing persons report for me right now, I shot back. You let us take care of that, and no, your parents will not be harmed. But after what you've seen here, we can't let you make contact with them again. Once again, who are you people? I grilled one last time. You'll learn more about us as we go along, but I think it's pretty clear. We are the people who hunt things like the one you killed, the things that go bump in the night. Monsters, cryptids, whatever you call them, we exterminate them and keep them out of the knowledge of the public. This world would drown in chaos if it knew what truly lurked around every corner. Your therapist, for example, had to be eliminated. She was far too psychotic and would have been of no use to us. And I think we both know you don't exactly mourn her after she tried throwing you to the sharks. She would have drawn too much attention, with her quite literally having a door to the expanse, as you call it, right in her office. But you're different. You are indirectly throwing people off the trail, which is why we need you to finish what you started and join us. I can assure you that you will be well compensated for your work. There are many opportunities here at the agency. Wouldn't you like to be able to go back into the expanse one day with a fully armed team and kill everything in there that ever tormented you? And will torment or kill everyone else who ends up there? I'll be honest, her offer was intriguing. My instincts were all telling me to say no, but what choice did I have? Decline and die, or accept and become some sort of monster-killing soldier? I'm not sure how much I wanted that kind of life, but I did, however, want to exterminate everything living inside the expanse, and maybe the expanse itself, if that was even possible. I wanted to avenge those who didn't make it out like me, those who fell victim to that hell and never lived to tell the tale. Sure, I'd have to sacrifice my mission of getting the truth out to people, but if I destroyed the very threat that caused it in the first place, then it wouldn't even be necessary. So I took a look at Sandra and made probably the worst or best decision of my life. With a long, drawn-out exhale, I asked, "When do I start training?" 5 True Scary New Year's Eve Stories to End 2024.
Story 1. I found a box of my things in my boyfriend's closet. I never gave them to him. It started with a sweater. A simple navy blue pullover I thought I'd lost months ago. It was folded neatly on the top shelf of my boyfriend's closet, and I only noticed it because I was hunting for a blanket while he was in the shower. I pulled it down, frowning. "Hey, Nick," I called out, holding it up as he came back into the room, toweling his hair. "Isn't this my sweater? I thought I lost it." Nick froze for just a second, then shrugged. "Oh yeah, you left it here ages ago. I forgot to mention it." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right. I didn't remember ever bringing that sweater to his place. That nagging feeling stayed with me over the next few days. It wasn't like Nick to keep secrets. We'd been dating for 2 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I trusted him. But this felt different. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until Nick was out running errands, then went back to his closet. The sweater was still on the shelf, but as I scanned the other items, I noticed something odd. A plain cardboard box tucked in the corner, partially hidden by a stack of old shoes. My name was scrawled on the lid. Heart pounding, I pulled the box out and opened it. Inside was a collection of things that were unmistakably mine. A hairbrush I hadn't seen in over a year. A photo of me from high school that I'd lost when I moved out of my parents' house. A necklace my best friend gave me for my birthday, the one I thought I'd dropped somewhere in the city. My stomach turned. These weren't things I could have accidentally left behind. They were items I hadn't seen in years, things I thought were gone forever. Then I found the notebook. It was a cheap spiral-bound journal, one I used to carry around for doodling and writing grocery lists. Flipping through the pages, my throat tightened. The handwriting wasn't mine, it was Nick's. Page after page, he'd written down details about me. Things I liked, things I didn't, places I went, people I talked to. The final pages were the worst. They weren't about me anymore. They were about us. Things I hadn't even told him. Arguments we never had. Future plans I'd never agreed to. And at the very end, scrawled in a frantic, looping hand, was a single sentence repeated over and over. "She'll understand eventually." I didn't hear Nick come back. By the time I looked up, he was standing in the doorway, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "I told you to stay out of my closet," he said, his voice eerily calm. I tried to speak, to explain, but my words caught in my throat. Nick stepped closer, slowly closing the door behind him. "It's okay," he said softly. "Now we can finally talk about what's next." Story number 2. My wife has started to act strange. It all started with a damn single hair. My wife is on the shorter side. I can see over her head even if she stands on her toes. We were cooking when she tried to squeeze by. By chance, I looked down at the top of her head. At first, I didn't see it. It was hardly noticeable. A single short white hair was mixed inside the rest of the dark strands. I reached out to brush some hair away to get a better look. She flinched away from my hand but laughed at the movement. "You're going gray," I commented, smiling, hoping I didn't offend her. She wasn't even 30 yet. But I've seen people whose hair that turned before her. "Good. I'll look super hot." She laughed again. She let me look at the small white spot. It was short with a slight bend, and thicker than a normal hair. I reached over to take it between two fingers, ready to pull it out. She elbowed my chest, getting away with her first gray hair intact. Let it grow longer. I like it. I raised my hand, showing a truce. If she wanted to let it grow, I didn't care either way. It was just a hair. We got busy cooking dinner, and I forgot about it for a few days. That was until Carrie fainted at work. The call came while I was in the office. It was an hour before I got the message. I quickly told my boss I needed to leave for the day. I rushed to the hospital with dread forming in my stomach. I met her in the waiting room. She looked pale, but overall, not as bad as I feared. Her coworker drove her there, which was nice of him. Soon we were able to see a doctor for a checkup. They didn't see anything wrong with a basic checkup and tests. A scan had been suggested, but it would take a while before Carrie could get a more thorough look. We were sent home without any answers. I tucked her into bed to let her rest for the rest of the day. Thankfully, Carrie didn't feel lightheaded when we got back home, only overtired. I thought getting extra sleep would fix that. The next day, it appeared the rest cured whatever caused the sudden fainting spell. Carrie acted like her old self and went back to work, even though she could have taken another day off. I told her to not push herself. If she started feeling off again, she should stop working and get someone to help. She assured me she felt fine and nothing bad would happen. I believed that for a while. The medical tests wouldn't be for a few weeks. I kept an eye out for more gray hairs at the roots, however none showed. However, I noticed something else. Carrie started to act differently. The signs were small. She would pause for an extra few seconds trying to think of the next word she wanted to say. I figured she was just having issues sleeping. The concern came when her eating habits changed. Carrie had always been a picky eater. That was fine. We worked around that. One night, I came home to see the food I had bought for myself gone. I wasn't upset, just confused. It wasn't like her to devour frozen meals, and yet she had doubled what she ate without gaining weight. Instead, it looked like she had been losing some. I brought it up to her, and she just brushed it off, commenting she always ate more when the weather got colder. We had been married for 5 years. How did I never notice that before? Then her memory issues got worse. Small items like keys and her wallet were always getting misplaced. I was very understanding and helped her find what she'd lost every time. After we located what she had misplaced, she told me that maybe stress from work was getting to her. I believe that the first 3 times. I started to look online to see if there was anything I could find that explained these little changes. A month after it all started, she did something she never had before. She snapped at me. We were in the kitchen dishing out a special takeout meal when I caressed the top of her head. I leaned down to kiss the top of hers when she spun around, face red with rage. She pushed as hard as she could with both hands, knocking me hard into the table. It didn't hurt that much. I was more shocked than anything. "Don't fucking touch me without any warning," she shouted and stomped a foot. My mouth hung open. Carrie never swore. Well, rarely. She would drop a curse whenever it was funny. But I had never heard her swear in rage at anyone, let alone imagined she would do so of me. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I asked, mouth open. What had I done wrong? Did I cause this? Or did something else happen that made her act this way? My head swam with thousands of questions. Carrie quickly settled down, embarrassed by the outburst. She walked over and offered an apology hug that I took. "I'm fine. I don't know, I'm sorry. I just don't feel like myself for some reason," she said in a small voice. I risked a heavy question that changed the mood. "Do you think you might be pregnant? We've been trying for a while, and hormones can make you act different," I suggested. She scrunched up her face at the suggestion as a joke. Different. As in crazy. She half-joked. Well, I trailed off, and my answer made her smile again. Sadly, she pulled away and shook her head. No, I've already checked. I didn't let the disappointment show on my face. We hadn't had the money for the tests to see why we hadn't been able to have a child yet. We figured one would come at the right time. That time simply hadn't come yet. We'll call the doctors to see if you can get in for those scans sooner. You might have hit your head harder than we thought when you fainted at work. It's not as if you made changes to your medications or anything like that, I suggested. There hadn't been a bruise when she fainted, but I didn't want to take the risk. An odd expression came over her face as she chewed on the inside of her lip. Carrie had something she wanted to tell me, but was too embarrassed to do so. It took a few minutes and some joking threats of eating her dinner for her to open up. I took some of these Asian pills I'd bought from the gas station. They're supposed to help with a lot of things, like those weird energy drinks you can find. I frowned concerned over this new information. Do you have the box still? We can look up to see if anyone else has had the same issues. She shook her head and sighed. No. It was like 2 months ago, if not longer. I took 3 and then tossed them out because they made me feel lightheaded. I don't know what they were called, and the gas station stopped selling them. Well, that sucked. She didn't remember enough to track down these mystery pills. At least we had something to bring up when we saw the doctors next. Or so I assumed. I held her tight, assuring her everything was all right. Figuring out why she felt so odd lately wouldn't be a big deal. That it would just take time. I was unaware time is what we lacked. A few days later, Carrie skipped work and stayed in bed. I offered to stay home, but she talked me into going to work. However, I left my shift early to find her in the same spot I had left her. Dark bags were under her eyes even though she rested all day. I got her dinner and begged Carrie to go to the hospital. Somehow, she talked me down and promised to go in the morning if she still felt tired. The meal woke her up a little. I climbed into bed next to her, and we watched a bit of TV before both falling asleep. That night, I woke up in the dark to hear her moving in her sleep. I turned on the bedside light, and she flinched away from it. Her hands went over her eyes, as if the brightness hurt. Do you have a headache? Can I give you something? I offered. Migraine. Yes, please. It feels like pressure. Her voice was low and weak. I got up and put my cell phone in my pajama pants pocket. Depending on the next few minutes, I would call for an ambulance. I got her a glass of water and some aspirin I helped her take. Her body felt far too thin. How had she lost so much weight without anyone noticing? While keeping her upright with a hand on her back, I spotted that single white hair growing out of the top of her head. I had forgotten about it. An urge to pluck it came over me. While Carrie remained defenseless, I took the hair between a finger and my thumb, then pulled. Her body jolted. Instead of normal hair, it appeared like I had started to pull out a thread that started to get thicker. Her scalp bulged a little from what was under the skin, making my stomach churn. Unable to help myself, I kept pulling. Slowly but surely, the long white thread came out, growing thick and thicker as more came into view. Her body twitched and her eyes rolled back. I knew this was hurting her, and yet I couldn't stop. Wrapping the exposed thread around my hand a few times, I took a good hold of it with the other and pulled as hard as I could. White liquid pooled out from around the wound. I heard a soft pop as the end of the white riddling mass came loose. It moved on its own, the end as thick as my finger. I could have sworn I heard it scream in the dim light of the room. Carrie had stopped moving, her body limp, but somehow a dazed smile was on her face. Oh, that's better. Her words were slurred, and her eyes slowly started to shut. Disgusted by what I saw, I tossed the thing away as quickly as I was able. My hands flew to her shoulders, trying to shake her awake. I didn't understand what happened or what I just did. The wriggling long white creature I just pulled from her head started to inch closer to my bare feet. I nearly threw up, my skin crawling at the sight. I might have been able to handle myself if what happened stopped there. Quickly my deepest fears came to light as more small white hairs pushed through Carrie's dark strands, moving on their own looking for a new host. Just one of these things was enough to nearly make me lose it. Seeing so many caused my brain to shut down. I hate myself for what I did next. I turned on my heels, fleeing the house, leaving my wife behind. I know I called 911, but had no memory of what I said. Police and an ambulance showed up. A lot of questions I did not have answers for were asked. I sat in the back of a police car, letting people speak to me, but not hearing a word. At some point, another car pulled up. A black one with a very plainly dressed man got out. He took some officers aside and spoke with them. Had someone called a lawyer for me? Did I need one? I didn't care enough to ask. The officers came back and asked if I could speak with them at the station. I numbly agreed but asked about Carrie. They said nothing and just ushered me away. I spent the night at the station going over what I had seen in detail with someone who didn't bother to write anything down. In the morning, I was free to go, but not a soul had told me about Carrie. When I asked, the officer gave a strained look and asked who that might be. I felt like I was going crazy. I demanded information about my wife and caused so much trouble they almost locked me up. A bomb was dropped on my world. They claimed I was never married, and I arrived that night because of a random arson attack on my home. These officers were bad actors. I knew they were lying, but they refused to drop the news story. I called in a favor, and a coworker drove me to my place. The street was swarmed with firefighters finishing putting out a blaze. I stared in sheer shock, realizing they kept me at the station all night so they could cover all this up. Who was they? I don't have the slightest clue. No matter who I spoke to, those people had reached them first. In stressed tones, they claimed to not know who Carrie was. This couldn't be happening. I didn't understand how things went wrong so fast. I called and called, praying anyone picked up the phone that knew her. Soon, my calls and any attempts at contacting her family were blocked except by one person. Her mother answered the phone. At first, she didn't speak, and I didn't think anyone was on the other end of the line. Was someone else there with her? Or did she just not want to speak with me? Please stop trying to contact us. We don't know who you're talking about, she said in a low, strained voice. I still have photos of her on my phone. Photos of us together. Please, tell me what's going on, I begged. She was also a victim here. I didn't want to get angry at her. I just wanted answers. That AI is getting good nowadays, she said, but didn't sound sure of her statement. Please. I loved her as much as you did. At first, I thought the line went dead. After a full minute, she responded, whispering so low I barely heard her. I did love her so much. But I need to think of my family. I lost a daughter. I refuse to let them take anyone else. She swiftly hung up the phone and then blocked my number. I knew I would never hear from her again, no matter how hard I tried. If I did press the matter, I endangered everyone Carrier ever cared about. Right now, I'm staying in a hotel using the last of my savings. My family has offered to take me in, to get help, to try and live a normal life. I considered taking them up on the offer. The only thing stopping me is a constant itch at the top of my head, growing more intense by the hour. Story number 3. Did your toothbrush change colors too? Wait, my husband Matt started to say. I swear my toothbrush was blue this morning. He held it up for me to see. It was green as the grass on the day we met. What are you talking about, honey? It's green. I laugh. I know. It's green now, but this morning it was blue. I swear. I know because blue is my favorite color. That's why I bought it. Blue for me and orange for Yo Dash. His eyes went wide as he looked at my toothbrush. Oh my God. Don't start this again. My toothbrush has always been pink. I said, starting to get exasperated. After a few more buts, I swears, and please believe me's, Matt eventually gave up trying to convince me and finished brushing his teeth. I'll go tuck the kids in bed, I said, and walked to their shared room. We had two beautiful little girls, Marcy and Maybelle. They were 5-year-old twins and the light of our lives. Hi, girlies. I'm Mommy. They shouted in unison. I kissed each of their blonde heads and reached to turn out the lamp. No. Wait. Maybelle yelled. Will you read us a story? I suppose we have time for a story, but it has to be a quick one. How about The Dancing Princess? No, not that one. Read us our favorite, The Swan and the Kitten, Marcy said. All right. I found the book on the shelf. Once upon a time. I read until both girls were fast asleep, then walked to my bedroom. How were they? Matt asked. Sweet, as always. They asked me to read their favorite story, The Dancing Princess. Matt smiled wistfully. I laughed. That's what I thought too, but apparently their favorite now is The Swan and the Kitten. Matt sat up in bed. I groaned inwardly. I knew what he was about to say. The Swan and Kitten. Since when? Mary, I know my little girls, and ever since they learned to read, their favorite book has been The Dancing Princess. Matt, relax. They're getting older. Their interests change. This is just the toothbrush thing all over again. He looked straight at me, and I knew right then and there that I had said the wrong thing. Baby, I'm sorry. Let's just go to sleep. Fine. But I swear to God, my toothbrush was blue this morning. Okay. I believe you. Good night. The morning came bright and early. I got up and found Matt in the bathroom staring at his red toothbrush again and muttering. I swear. He was saying. What? Did it change colors again? I laughed. He looked at me angrily but said nothing. I went to get the girls dressed and ready for breakfast. Daddy! They yelled with huge smiles on their faces. Hey girls! He said distractedly. Matt! I whispered. They want your attention. I know, it's just I swear our fridge was white yesterday. Now it's gray. Seriously, honey. You're starting to freak me out a bit. You've got to stop this. Freak you out? What about me? It's like I'm the only one noticing the world is going to shit. He yelled, causing the girls to start crying. Matt, look what you've done. But I didn't have to tell him. I could see clear as day how guilty he felt. God, Mary. I'm sorry, he said sadly. I think I should just leave for work. I'm only making things worse. He gave the sniffling twins a kiss and walked out the door. I'm sure all the neighbors heard him yell, Jesus fucking Christ. Since when do I have a fucking truck? Where's my goddamn sedan? I sighed and turned my attention back to the girls. Marcy and Maybelle, do you want to go to a park today? Sure, Mommy, they said, having forgotten their earlier sadness. I buckled the girls into my van and drove to the park. It was a beautiful sunny day. I saw a couple of my other mom friends and walked over to them. Wow, your daughter's hair is so pretty today, one of the moms said to me. Right. I wish I had red hair, another lamented. After a bit, we began to complain about our husbands. John barely helps out with the baby. I hear you. Well, doesn't do anything. Well, at least your problems are normal. Mine's then screaming about our toothbrush changing colors. Maybe you should look into couples therapy. One of them suggested. Yeah, maybe. I mulled it over. It was a good suggestion, but was therapy really necessary when the extent of your marital problems was the color of toothbrushes? We stayed at the park until the girls were tired and I was hungry. I buckled them up in the hatchback and drove home. Matt would be back from work soon. I hoped he was doing better. It would be terrible if he had embarrassed himself in front of his coworkers, or worse yet, his boss. But as he walked in, I knew from the look on his face that was exactly what had happened. It's the strangest thing, Mary, he began to say. What? I laughed. What did you call me? Mary. That's not my name. Of course it isn't, he sighed, then said reluctantly. What is it now? Mila. Maybe Mary was one of your ex-girlfriends, I suggested. Anyway, what happened? He leaned back and closed his eyes. It's not like you would believe me. No, please. Tell me, honey. Well, it's the strangest thing. I walked into the office, and there was a woman at the front. Tall, brown-haired. Very imposing. I introduced myself to her, and she asked if I was making a joke or something. I must have looked very confused because she said she's been my boss for the past 9 years. Yeah, Mrs. Ally Collins. I met her at the Christmas party. Sweet lady. No, my boss for the past 11 years has been a man. Mr. Aders Cooper. That is strange, honey. I'm sorry. Even if I knew he was wrong about his boss, I felt bad for him. He truly believed he was right. I think I just want to go give my daughters a hug. Marcy. Maybelle. He called. I started to laugh. Boy, you're really struggling with names today, huh? He looked strangely at me, then again yelled, Marcy. Maybelle. I detected a note of desperation in his voice. Maybe he had taken some drugs or something. Madeline and Mason. Get your butts in here now, and come give your father a kiss. I said for him, correcting their names. Mason. Maxwell yelled. Dear God. The twins came running in, their brown hair flying. Dad. What's so urgent you had to yell at me like that? Mason complained. Maxwell looked at me with horror. They look like they're 10 fucking years old. Yesterday, they were 5, and now one of them's a boy. He put his head in his hands and cried. Actually, Dad, we're 12, Madison said proudly. Michael got up and went upstairs. The fucking toothbrush. We heard him yell. It all started with the goddamn, fucking asshole toothbrush. It's purple now. You hear that, Mary, Mila, whatever the fuck your name is? It's purple. I put the boys to bed, then went to my room. He had cried himself to sleep. I put my arms around him and hoped tomorrow would be better. I missed my husband and hated that he felt so lost. The next morning was better. I found him brushing his teeth, but thankfully not lamenting that it had changed again. I don't think I could have taken another Why Is It Yellow today. I'm better now, Em. My toothbrush can change colors. That's fine. My boss can magically change into a woman. Also fine. My children can age 7 years. Totally fine. As long as I have all of you. Children, I said uneasily. Do you have a child from another woman you never told me about? Were you talking about him? Our children, Madison and maybe on Mason, whatever. Mason? I asked, but he didn't respond. He ran out of the bathroom. I followed. He flung our daughter's bedroom door open and sank to the floor sobbing. Honey, what's wrong? I put my hand on Malachi's shoulder. What's wrong with Daddy? Millie cried. Where's Maybelle? He yelled. There is no Maybelle, sweetie. There's only ever been Macy. Story number 4. Help me, There is a man pretending to be my dog. My name is Sydney. I am 13 years old. My best friend's name was Honey. She was a 9-year-old Goldie. The man pretending to be Honey looks like he is around 40 years old. He wears her skin, and my family believes it is her. They brought him home 3 weeks ago. My mom cried when she saw him sitting on the porch. My dad dropped to his knees, calling him, "Our sweet girl," as he scratched behind Honey's floppy ear, reaching his white, pink human ear. He didn't seem to notice how Honey's ear was slightly falling with each scratch. Danny, my little brother, hugged his neck and buried his face in the man's skin, rubbing the rolls of his back like it was fur. But it's not Honey. It's a naked man wearing my best friend's fur. Honey didn't walk like that. She didn't stumble over her own paws, or, well, hands and knees, because that's what they are. Hands and knees. He crawls awkwardly, shifting his weight like he's never done it before. Like he's learning how to be a dog. The worst part is, I think he believes it. He barks when my parents tell him to, his deep and manly voice sounding nothing like my Honey. He growls when Danny plays tug-of-war, getting in a dog-like playful position, as drool drips from his chin and his body is on full display. He even wags what's left of her tail. It's unsettling. It makes me cry. He sits by the door when the leash comes out, panting with this strange, unnatural smile like he's excited. Like he wants to be walked. I tried to tell my mom. I told her it wasn't Honey, but she just stroked his head and said, "Don't say that, Sydney. Look how happy she is to be home." The first night he got here, I heard scratching outside my window. I peeked through the curtains and saw him in the backyard, digging with his bare hands. His nails were caked with dirt, and he was muttering to himself between shallow, panting breaths. I stayed up all night listening to him claw at the ground. The next morning, I found out why. When I went outside, there was a fresh hole near the fence where he'd been digging. It was sloppy, dirt scattered everywhere, and right at the bottom of it was Honey's old collar. It was torn, the leather shredded, and the metal buckle was stained dark red. I didn't hear him coming. "You shouldn't have gone out here," he said. His voice was low, and when I turned around, he was crouched by my legs, his head tilted like he was trying to understand me. His hands were dirty, trembling as he reached for me, but I bolted before he could get any closer. "Honey, come here, girl," my dad called out, and he went back to barking and tail wagging, trotting to him on hands and knees. But not before looking at me with his tongue out. Since then, he won't leave me alone. He follows me around the house, sniffing at my toes and licking my legs. Any time I'd yell at him to stop, my family would tell me I've turned into a dog abuser. They'd make me pet him, and he would bark happily. He sits outside my door at night, whining softly, scratchy at the wood. Last night, he finally pushed the door open. "Scoot over," he growled, climbing into my bed without waiting for me to answer. He curled up beside me, his knees pulled to his chest, and rested his head on my pillow. He smelled like dirt and sweat, and something I don't want to name. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there, stiff and silent, as he muttered and whimpered in his sleep, his breath warm against the back of my neck. I could hear every human word that left his lips, and yet my family doesn't believe me. They really think it's Honey. I am the only one mourning my best friend. I don't think he's going to stop. And I'm scared. Story number 5. Don't turn. Don't look. Don't think. Just focus. Marty. This is all about focus. Think about Alice. Keep driving. Eyes on the road. The hitchhikers will step out eventually. They always do. Just don't look back at them. Don't ever look back. Don't think, just drive. I have a lot of love for my parents, having the generosity to take Alice and me in after her leukemia relapsed, but goddamn do they live far from civilization. Or maybe there just ain't a lot of civilization in Idaho to go around, not in a bad way. The quiet is nice. I'd been enjoying the countryside more than I anticipated. That being said, they could stand to spend some taxpayer dollars on a few more Walgreens locations. Feels like I've been driving all night. Must almost be morning. They have to be worried sick. Alice may actually be physically sick without her anti-nausea meds. I shook my head side to side in a mix of disbelief and self-flagellating shame. Took a left turn when I should have taken a right, a downright boneheaded mistake. The price for overworking myself, but I mean, what other option do I have? Chemotherapy ain't exactly cheap. For a moment, I forgot where I was and what I was doing. Accidentally looked in my rearview mirror at the 5 hitchhikers in the back seats. Silent and staring forward with dead and empty eyes at nothing in particular. Curiously, my eyes snapped forward. Not wanting to linger too long on them, wasn't sure what else I'd see. Can't be doing that on this road. Maintaining focus is key. Despite my near instantaneous reaction, I did see the new hitchhikers, but only for a moment. No surprises this time, thankfully. They wore suits like all the others, monocolored with earthy tones from head to toe. Same odd fabric, too rough and coarse-looking, almost like leather. Honestly, never seen anything like it before tonight. But I haven't ever been in a situation like this before either. Whatever backwoods county I got myself turned around in, it likes to follow its own rules. For example, I didn't pull over to pick up these hitchhikers. Somehow, they just found their way in. Or maybe I did pull over and let them in. Then so tired lately, who could even be sure? They don't say much, no matter how many questions I ask. Would love to know where I am, but I guess it isn't for them to say. My gaze again drifted, this time from the road to the car's dashboard, and I let myself see the time. Big mistake. 7:59 p.m. Nope, that ain't right. I rapidly blinked a few times, adjusted myself so I was sitting up straighter, and then looked back to the clock again. Now, it didn't show any time at all. Marty Jesus. Focus up. I blinked once more, this time for longer. Not sure how long I was blinking, couldn't have been longer than 10 seconds. If I close my eyes for too long, they become hard to open again. Requires a lot of energy. Anxiously, I peered back at the dashboard for a third time. 4:45 a.m. See, there we go. Now that makes sense. By the time dawn arrives, I'm sure I'll have found the gas station to pull over in. Ask for directions back to whatever my parents' address is. I'll figure that out later. Right now I need to focus. Funny things happened in this part of the country when you didn't focus. Sometimes, the yellow pavement markings would change colors or disappear entirely. Other times, the road itself would start to look off black asphalt turning to muddy brownstone at a moment's notice. At first, it scared me. Scared me a lot, come to think of it. Made me want to pull over and close my eyes. But Alice needed her nausea meds, and judging by the time, I had work in 2 short hours. I needed to make it home soon so I can check on her, give her a kiss before school. Hopefully, I'll have time to brew a pot of coffee too. My eyes, though they just don't seem to want to stick with the program. Dancing around from thing to thing like they don't have a care in the world. They have one job. Watch the road for places that might have a map or someone who can tell me where I am. Well, 2 jobs. Watch the road and focus on the road. At least it wasn't treacherous. The path has been pretty much straight after the wrong turn. Initially, Alice was nervous about starting at her new school. And I'd get it that transition is hard enough without factoring in everything she has had to manage in her short life. We'd been lucky, though, finding a well-reviewed sign language school in Idaho, of all places. She's amazing. You'd think that the leukemia and the deafness from her first go with chemotherapy would have crushed her spirit. Not my Alice. She's tough as nails. Tough as nails like her dad. I smiled, basking in a moment of fatherly pride. Of course, you can't be doing that on this road. You'll start to see things you don't want to see. When my eyes again met the rearview mirror, I noticed there was now only one hitchhiker now, but he had transformed and revealed his real shape. His face was flat like a manhole cover, almost the size of a manhole cover too, but less circular, more oblong. He was staring at me with one bulging eye. It was the only one he had, the only one I could see at least. No other recognizable facial features. Just the one, bloated, soulless eye. What's worse, I saw what was behind him. Behind the car, I mean. I closed my eyes as soon as I could, but my mind was already rapidly reviewing and trying to reconcile what I had seen behind the car. There was a wall a few car lengths away. No road to be seen, just an inclined wall with tire tracks on it. The atmosphere behind me had a weird thickness to it. Light rays shone through the thickness unnaturally from someplace above. The ground looked like dust, or maybe sand. Why would the ground look like dash? Focus. Think of Alice and focus. When I finally found the courage to open my eyes, it all looked right again, and I breathed a sigh of relief and chuckled to myself from behind the wheel. Straight road in front of me, framed by a starless black sky. Everything in its right place. Until I saw something snaking its way into my peripheral vision. The hitchhiker was now in the passenger seat. He turned to me and leaned his body forward over the stick shift. His lips were pursed and nearly pressing against my ears, rhythmically opening and closing his mouth, but making no sound. I could have sworn he was close enough to touch my ear with his lips, but I guess he wasn't because I couldn't feel it. Instead, I felt my heartbeat start to race, or I imagined what it was like to feel your heartbeat race. Why did I have to imagine? Don't turn. Don't look. Don't think. Just focus. But I couldn't. Something was wrong. I thought about closing my eyes. For a while, not just for a little. To see what would happen. I was curious what would happen. Had been all night, actually. But then, like the angel she was, Alice's visage appeared on the horizon. She was standing at her second-story window in my parents' home, watching and waiting for me to return from this long night. I wasn't getting closer for some reason, but she wasn't getting any further away either. She was far, but even at that distance, I could see her doing something in the window. When I squinted, it looked like maybe she was waving. Alice was waving at me. Alice could see me. Must mean I'm close. Eyes on the road. Focus. Every night around 8 p.m., Alice would stand and watch the road from her bedroom on the second story of her grandparents' home. What she was waiting for didn't happen as often anymore, but her birthday was a week away. The phenomenon seemed to be more frequent around her birthday. As the clock ticked into 8:03 p.m., she saw a familiar sight. Two faint luminescent orbs traveled slowly down the deserted road in her direction, creating even fainter cylinders of light in front of him, like headlights from an approaching car. The first time this happened, Alice was 9. To cope with her father's disappearance, she would watch the road at night and pretend she saw his car returning home. One night, she saw balls of light appear in the distance, and it made hope explode through her body like fireworks. The balls of light turned into the driveway, and when they did, Alice noticed something that made hope mutate into fear and confusion. The headlights had no car attached, dissolving without a trace within seconds of their arrival. For months, this was a nightly occurrence, and only she could see it, which scared Alice. But when she formally explained the phenomenon to her grandfather for the first time, how they looked like headlights without a car, a weak and bittersweet grin appeared on his face, and he carefully brought up his hands to sign to her. "I'd bet good money that's Marty making his way home, sweetheart. He just loved you that much." From then on, the orbs comforted Alice and made her feel deeply connected with her long-lost father, wherever he was. But in the present, at the age of nearly 17, she had modified the purpose of her vigil. Originally, she liked the idea of her father's endless search for her. It made her feel less alone. But as she lived life and matured, she realized how alone he must be looking for her from where he was. All she wanted was for Marty to stop looking. She wanted her father to finally rest. Now, when the orbs passed by, she would sign to them from her window, desperately hopeful that even from where he was he could see her hands move, communicating an important message to him. I love you and I miss you. But please, Dad, let go. Story number 6. I found the real reason the Library of Alexandria was burned. I'd always been fascinated by ancient Egypt. Not just the pyramids or the pharaohs, but the secrets, the rumors, stories of cursed tombs, hidden knowledge, and the fabled Library of Alexandria. So, when I had the chance to join a small archaeological dig near the city of Alexandria, I jumped on it like a moth to flame. It was my second week there when it happened. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Nasser, was busy cataloging what appeared to be fragments of a ruined temple. I, on the other hand, was in a cramped tunnel deep underground, brushing dust off what I thought was another pottery shard. But when my flashlight caught the glint of something metallic, I froze. It wasn't a shard, it was a container. A small bronze cylinder, sealed with wax and inscribed with hieroglyphs. My heart raced as I carefully pried it open. Inside was a scroll. Not papyrus, but something else, almost leathery, darkened with age, and covered in tiny, painstakingly inked symbols I didn't recognize. I brought it to the surface, expecting excitement from Dr. Nasser, but when he saw it, his face went pale. He muttered something in Arabic and refused to touch it. He told me to put it back where I found it. Some things should stay buried, he warned, voice trembling. But I couldn't. Curiosity had me in its grip. That night, I smuggled the scroll back to my room. I spent hours trying to decipher it, cross-referencing ancient scripts, but nothing made sense. It wasn't hieroglyphs or Greek or anything I'd seen before. I was about to give up when the letters began shifting. At first, I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But no, the symbols were moving, rearranging themselves into English. It said, "Knowledge is a flame. It burns those who seek it unprepared." The room grew cold, unnaturally so, as I read on. It wasn't a historical text. It was a warning, a record of something the library had tried to contain, something so catastrophic that the scroll's writers had resorted to burning the entire place to the ground. The scroll spoke of him. Not gods, not demons, something older. Entities beyond comprehension, who existed in the void before creation. The library had been a fortress, a prison to hold their names, their true names, written in this script. The librarians had kept the knowledge locked away, knowing that merely knowing the names would give the entities a doorway into our reality. And then the scroll began to list those names. I didn't mean to read them. I swear I didn't. But the words pulled at my eyes, forcing me to follow the lines. My head throbbed, my vision darkened, and I felt like I was falling into the ink itself. The first name echoed in my mind like a thunderclap. The walls of my room began to bend and ripple as if they were made of water. Shadows moved in the corners, shadows that weren't cast by anything I could see. The second name filled me with dread so profound I couldn't breathe. I heard whispers then, voices that weren't my own, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. By the third name, the shadows weren't just moving, they were watching. And they weren't alone. It called to me, and against all reason, I kept reading. The fourth name was like a blade carving into my thoughts, slicing away at the fragile walls of my sanity. And then, something new emerged from the shadows, visions. Not dreams, not hallucinations, memories. I saw the library as it was, before the fire. Grand halls stretched infinitely in every direction, lined with shelves that towered like the pyramids. Scholars moved about in quiet reverence, their faces lined with fear more than awe. This was not a place of learning, it was a prison. And in the heart of that prison, I saw him. Julius Caesar. But he wasn't the man I'd read about in history books. No conqueror, no statesman. He was afraid, trembling as he stood in the library's inner sanctum. His toga was stained with blood, not his own, and in his hands he held this scroll. The librarians surrounded him, pleading in a language I couldn't understand. They were desperate to stop him, but it was too late. Caesar had already read a name. The walls of the sanctum rippled, just as my room had. Shadows began to move, but these were larger, darker, hungrier. Caesar stumbled back, dropping the scroll, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice hollow. "I didn't," but the shadows didn't care. They surged forward, consuming one of the librarians in an instant. The man's scream was short-lived, cut off as his body disintegrated into ash. The rest of the scholars acted quickly, their fear overridden by purpose. They gathered scrolls, tomes, and artifacts, carrying them to a central pyre. One of them held a torch, but his hand shook. He hesitated, glancing at Caesar. "Do it," the general shouted, his voice cracking. "Burn it all." The librarian obeyed. The fire roared to life, consuming centuries of knowledge in seconds. The shadows recoiled, shrieking as the flames grew brighter. But it wasn't enough. The entity that Caesar had unleashed couldn't be undone so easily. It was already loose, spreading through the cracks of reality. The vision shifted then, snapping back to Caesar. I saw him years later, standing alone on the Ides of March, just before his assassination. He whispered something under his breath, a prayer or a curse, and for a moment, I understood. The fire hadn't been enough. The thing he'd unleashed was still with him, haunting him, whispering its name. And now, it whispers to me. Not in words I can understand, but in feelings, cold, suffocating dread. The kind that seeps into your bones and convinces you there's something watching, just out of sight. I stopped turning on the lights at night. It doesn't matter anymore. The shadows are always there. Sometimes they move, shifting like they're alive, stretching long fingers toward me before recoiling as if they're savoring the weight. Last night, I thought I heard a voice. Not a whisper, but a single, clear word spoken from the darkness behind me. A name. It wasn't one I recognized. Not from the scroll, not from the vision, not from anything I've ever heard. But the sound of it made my teeth ache and my heart falter. I don't know what it means. I don't want to. I burned everything I had from the dig, the notes, the photographs, even my clothes. It didn't help. Whatever I brought back wasn't the scroll. It's something else. Something I can't escape. I haven't slept in days. I'm afraid if I close my eyes, I'll hear the next name. Or worse, I'll see them. But the fire taught me something. Knowledge is a flame, yes, but it's also a chain. The more you learn, the tighter it binds you. And now I know just enough to be trapped forever. I think of Caesar, of the fire he started, and I understand why he failed. You can't destroy knowledge. You can only delay it. It wasn't just the scrolls or the names. It was the people who knew them. If I'm right, then there's only one way to end this. Only one way to stop the whispers before they reach someone else. The shadows are closer now. And I've already lit the match. Story number 7. I made a deal to escape death, but it's worse than I imagined. When I was 19, I almost died. A car accident left me pinned under the wreckage, my lungs collapsing as metal sliced through my side. I remember the faint sound of sirens, the warmth of blood pooling under me, and the icy grip of fear. But more than anything, I remember the voice. "Do you want to live?" It was deep, reverberating like it came from within me, but no one was there. The voice repeated itself, louder this time. "Do you want to live?" "Yes," I choked, barely able to whisper. The pain stopped instantly. The sirens faded, replaced by complete silence. And then the voice returned, calm and commanding. "You'll live. But you will never escape me." I woke up in the hospital, miraculously unharmed. The doctors couldn't explain it. My injuries had been catastrophic, but by the time I arrived, there wasn't a scratch on me. They called it divine intervention. I should have felt grateful, but all I felt was dread. For years, I tried to forget the voice, convincing myself it was a hallucination brought on by shock. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be with a lingering sense of doom. But on my 30th birthday, it came back. I was blowing out candles when the room went silent. No clinking glasses, no music, just a deafening absence of sound. I froze, gripping the edge of the table, and then I heard it. "Time to pay." The voice. The same one from the accident, but this time, it sounded closer, like it was standing behind me. I turned quickly, but no one was there. My friends laughed, oblivious, as the world spun around me. I didn't sleep that night. From that moment on, things started happening. Shadows lingered in the corners of my vision, twisting unnaturally. Doors creaked open on their own. Mirrors warped, showing things that shouldn't be there. An extra hand, a face that wasn't mine. Then the whispers started. Quiet at first, like static, but they grew louder over time. At night, I'd hear my name, repeated over and over in a low, guttural chant. Last week, I woke up to find my reflection staring at me, even though I wasn't standing in front of the mirror. Its lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I smashed it, but when I looked down, my reflection stared up from the shattered pieces. I tried everything, priests, psychics, even therapists, but nothing worked. No one could help me. 2 nights ago, I saw it for the first time. A figure tall and shadowy, standing at the foot of my bed. Its eyes burned red, and its face twisted in a permanent grin. I screamed, but it didn't move. It just whispered, "You'll never escape." Last night, it got closer. I woke up with its face inches from mine, its cold breath on my skin. It didn't speak, but its grin widened as it raised a single, skeletal finger to its lips, silencing me. Now, I'm writing this because I know tonight is the end. I don't know what it wants or why it waited this long, but I can feel it. It's in the room with me as I type this. To whoever reads this, don't make deals. No matter how desperate you are, death isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Trust me. Story number 8. My cats are protecting me from something. It started with a letter and a deed. Uncle Elias, my mother's reclusive brother, had passed away under mysterious circumstances, leaving his sprawling house and the surrounding land to me. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, but my childhood memories of him were fond. He was eccentric but kind, his stories always a little too fantastical to be true, yet told with such conviction that I believed every word. When I was younger, I idolized him. As I got older, life took over, and we drifted apart. Now, standing in the doorway of his old house, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and unease. The house had the kind of presence that loomed over you, tall and weather-worn, with windows that seemed to watch. The surrounding land stretched endlessly, a mixture of untamed forest and rolling fields. It felt both inviting and isolating. Still, it was mine now, and I planned to make it my home. It felt too big and empty for just me, though, so I decided I'd adopt a cat for companionship. The shelter told me I could pick up my new friend in a week, plenty of time to settle in. The first night in the house was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet where every creak of the floorboard sounds like a footstep. I chalked it up to my nerves and the age of the place. By the third night, though, I couldn't ignore the oddities. I'd hear faint whispers, just on the edge of comprehension, coming from empty rooms. Doors I knew I had closed would be slightly ajar. A cold draft seemed to follow me, though the windows were all sealed. Once, I found a light on in the basement, a light I was sure I hadn't turned on. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of something heavy scraping across the attic floor directly above my bed. I lay frozen, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, the noise stopped, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The following morning, I ventured up to the attic, but found nothing out of place. The thick layer of dust covering the old furniture and forgotten belongings was undisturbed. Whatever had made the noise left no trace. By the time the week was up, I was desperate for my new companion. When I finally brought home the little black cat, I named her Artemis. I felt a glimmer of hope. Her presence immediately made the house feel less oppressive. She was curious and bold, strutting through the rooms like she owned the place. That first night, she slept at the foot of my bed, and I felt safer than I had since I'd moved in. The strange occurrences didn't stop entirely, but they seemed less intense. The whispers were softer, the drafts less chilling. It was as if the house, or whatever was in it, was wary of Artemis. Intrigued, I started researching cats and the paranormal. I learned that in many cultures, cats are believed to have a spiritual connection, capable of warding off evil spirits and guiding the dead. It was a comforting thought, but it also raised a chilling question. Had something in this house been responsible for my uncle's death? One night, I decided to test a theory. I left Artemis in the living room and went upstairs to my bedroom. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the oppressive feeling returned, stronger than ever. The whispers were louder, more insistent, and I swore I could see a shadow moving in the corner of my eye. Panicked, I called for Artemis. She padded into the room, jumped onto the bed, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The whispers faded. The shadow disappeared. That's when I knew. Whatever was in this house couldn't touch me as long as Artemis was nearby. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. What if there was a moment she wasn't there? What if the spirit grew stronger? The solution seemed simple: more cats. I adopted another, a gray tabby I named Milo, and then another, a calico named Cleo. Each new addition seemed to strengthen the invisible barrier between me and the malevolent presence. Soon, the house was alive with the sound of purring and playful paws. My little army of feline guardians had transformed the oppressive mansion into something almost cozy. But the spirit didn't leave. Every night, as I lay in bed surrounded by my cats, I'd see it. A shadowy figure standing in the doorway watching. It never moved, never spoke, but its presence was undeniable. I could feel its hatred, its frustration. It wanted to be gone, but it couldn't reach me. As the weeks turned to months, the cats became my life. I added more to the family. A Siamese named Oliver, a fluffy Maine Coon I called Willow, a scrappy little stray I found on the property whom I named Ash. The list goes on. Each one brought a new layer of warmth and protection to the house. The spirit's presence became almost a routine. It was there every night, but it could do nothing but stare. Occasionally, I'd feel a pang of fear. What if I was wrong? What if it was biding its time? On those nights, I'd gather all the cats into my bedroom, their comforting purrs lulling me to sleep. They seemed to know, instinctively, when I needed them most. I'd wake up to find them all nestled around me, a fortress of fur and trust. One stormy night, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and for the first time in months, I felt truly vulnerable. I lit candles, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. The spirit silhouette seemed larger than night, more defined. But Artemis jumped onto my lap, her green eyes meeting mine with an unspoken assurance. Milo and Cleo flanked her, and soon the others joined. Their presence banished the fear. Even now, as I write this, I can see it. The spirit stands in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the hallway light. It stares, as it always does, but I'm not afraid. Artemis is curled up on my chest, purring softly. Milo is at my feet. Cleo, Willow, Oliver, and Ash are scattered around the room, their serene presence a shield I know will never falter. This house is mine. And as long as I have my cats, it always will be. Story number 9. The dogs howling outside my house keep scaring the kids. Now they're claiming the dogs are making faces at them. I am a single mother taking on the challenge of raising 2 children in the middle of nowhere. My youngest, Ruby, is 4, and my eldest, Jade, is 7. Sometimes, I feel like our presence isn't enough to fill the 2-story farmhouse we live in, surrounded by never-ending fields, pierced by a single road, our connection to the town nearby. I could never leave the property. The family business relies on the farm, and my job is to keep it alive and going. I did feel stung by fear from time to time when it came to managing business and my 2 kids, especially because I had no support from anyone, but time passed, and I stopped feeling lonely or insecure. We had plenty of dogs around the house, some sort of precaution I subconsciously took for me and my girls. I felt like, if anyone were to come near us, the dogs would keep us safe, since they'd be trained to bite, scratch, and scare away anyone but the 3 of us. Their barking was our alarm, but we usually had nothing to worry about apart from animals or friends passing. We just come home from a road trip to my mother's house, and were exhausted. Our car had broken down halfway through the woods, and we had to stop at a random couple's house to call for help. By the time we managed to get on the road again, over 6 hours had passed, and Ruby and Jade were irritated and tired beyond measure. I unlocked the door, and they sprinted up the stairs. I remained behind them in the doorway, key in hand, taking in the creaking of the house and the humid air. It was 11 p.m. and darkness and coldness had suffocated the building and its hallways, and sometimes I felt uneasy even if I'd practically grown up on the farm. Something rattled behind me, and I turned around facing the porch in my car, barely visible in the night. I remained waiting, my back straight, until I heard the first raindrops, then I shut the door behind me and locked it. That night, the rain fell on our rooftop, the wind shook our home to the bone, and the walls trembled under the storm. Our dogs howled. Their barking was so unnatural, almost fearful, tearing down through their throats, hoarse and desperate. They'd never howled like that. Ruby and Jade slept in my bed that night. The storm hadn't done too much damage, and yet it left a looming presence over us, almost as if we were waiting for another one to finish the job. The next night, as I was tucking Ruby into bed, the silence of the house was pierced by a long howl. We froze, then barking followed, sustained only by one dog. "Is someone outside?" Ruby muttered, stretching. "Some cat or what?" "Yeah, probably. It will shut up soon," I replied, annoyed. I threw a glimpse out the window and saw nothing. I went to bed, but the howling continued. I hated those occurrences when one of our dogs decided on a random night to just go nuts at whatever the hell he fixated on. Shut up, shut you up. I tossed and turned, but the goddamn dog would not stop. Finally, I went downstairs and through the back door, and there he was. One of our dogs, Samson, barking like a lunatic at nothing. "Sams, honey, what are you doing?" I mumbled, searching for anything in the night. "Who's there?" Samson stopped barking the minute I opened the door and just stared at me. I thought I couldn't stand his howls, but now the silence triggered me in a different, unexpected way. He was a tall, lean dog of no particular breed, with dark eyes, sizzling like pieces of charcoal. His quietness surprised me, and I stared into his eyes for a few moments, but sensed no fear. I looked up to the distance, the vastness of the fields, so far away that the kitchen light couldn't reach. The silence was heavy, and Sanson was as still as stone, looking straight at me. I suddenly felt very little, and just wanted to get to my girls, so I stepped back to shut the door. The moment I swung it, Sanson leaped towards the entrance of the kitchen, but I'd been faster. I shut it and locked it, hearing his body slam against the other side. Then, he let out a long, hoarse howl. It sounded vulnerable. Human. I sat there trembling in disbelief. Took a sharp breath, bit my lip, then shook my head and went upstairs, up to the last floor, to my girls' bedroom, and slept on their floor. I couldn't show them I was afraid of our dog, who was supposed to protect us. Days passed after that incident, and I almost forgot about it. Even though I found myself to stare a bit longer at Sanson, he didn't follow up with anything peculiar after that night. I dismissed the whole thing and focused on other problems, since I had plenty to pick from. I think 2 weeks had passed after that, when a cold, slippery hand woke me up in the middle of the night. I opened my eyes to greet Jade, on her tiptoes, looking down at me, unsure of what to say. Why was she still on her tiptoes, and whispering? She'd already woken me up, and Ruby was right behind her. "Mom, the dogs are howling again." This time, it wasn't just Sanson. The howls formed a hoarse, crying mess that bounced off our walls and echoed into the darkness, and it wasn't just annoying, the way you throw a shoe at a dog barking at the moon, but plain disturbing. They were desperate, eating into the silence, hungry for screaming, for crying, for mourning. I stood up and rushed to the window. Something had to be around our house, passing, or maybe a burglar had studied our farm for the past weeks and was slowly making his way in. Our home was big, and dark thoughts began racing into my mind, thoughts of shadowy figures looking for my girls, my money, my home. "They've been howling 4 days, Mommy," Jade mumbled. "You can't hear them 'cause you're sleeping all the time, but they're there, and they won't stop. It's scary. I can't sleep." I hushed them and told them to sit still in my bed, as I closed the bedroom door and tiptoed to the ground floor. Our dining room had 2 large sliding glass doors, and at night it felt like our whole wall was missing, and you could see straight into the cornfields. It was moments like these where I was fully aware of how small we were, and how isolated. Around us, acres of land spilled and spilled into the woods, blending into the pitch-black sky, and a never-ending darkness surrounded my home. What could I even do? Even if someone was trying to break into my house, could I just call the police and tell them that the dogs are barking, without even identifying an intruder? As I approached the doors, my head spinning, I made out the silhouettes of 3 out of 8 of my dogs. Among them was Sanson, and they were barking like crazy. I slid one of the doors open and, just like the other night, they stopped barking and just stared at me. I stared back like a fool, not knowing how to react. Other dogs were still howling around the house, but Sanson, Penny, and Jack were still, looking at me calmly, their eyes too human, too tamed. Almost as if they knew something I didn't. Before I could close the door, Sanson let out a low, hoarse growl and stepped back, then all 3 of them left. I heard their howls from the left side of the dining room, and I sat and listened for a few seconds, shivering in the cold night, and holding onto the glass door like holding onto a lifeline. I was hoping I'd hear something else, like footsteps or a voice. Something human that would justify my animals acting so strange. I closed the door and locked it, my eyes half closed from the tiredness and my throat dry. I had no idea what to do, and I felt the pressure of my actions as a mother, aware of them affecting my children's lives too. As I got to the second floor, I noticed my girls had shut all the doors and found them sitting still in my bed, wide-eyed. "Are you okay? The dogs are just going crazy at these cats outside." "I'm sorry. I know how scary it can feel, but it's all right, I promise. Do you want to watch some TV?" They didn't answer, but stared at me. I took it as a yes, and we eventually fell asleep huddled together. The next night, I was awoken again, this time by Ruby. Her tiny silhouette was shivering from the cold, and her eyes were bloodshot. "Ruby, are you crying?" "Mommy, we looked out the window." "What did you see, honey?" "Were the dogs being bad again?" "The dogs were making faces at us." A long pause followed, where I shifted my gaze from Ruby to Jade, raising my eyebrows. I understood the howling scared them, but I didn't know it had slipped into their dreams too. "Did you have a bad dream, Ruby?" "No, Mom," Jade replied. "We heard the barking and I looked outside for the cats, and Sammy and Max were out there, and they raised their head and looked straight at us. Yeah, and their eyes were really wide and they were laughing at us." What I managed to understand from their overlapping descriptions sent a shiver down my spine, and my neck tensed up all of a sudden, as my throat began to dry up. Jade had said the dogs had raised their heads up to look at their window, and their eyes were really wide. Their teeth were bared as if they were smiling, and they looked, as Jade said, like funny masks. Ruby, on the other hand, chose to mimic the face they'd made. She grinned at me, then raised her eyebrows as high as they could, then let her head fall back, lifting her face toward the ceiling. "I didn't want them to see me like that, Mom. To look at me like that. I didn't want to alarm them more than I already had, so I told them that it might have been the moonlight hitting weird and that I would check it out. I followed them to their room and looked out the window but saw nothing. The ground was bare, and nothing moved outside. Not even the wind. I'd barely managed to get them to sleep again. The next day, Samson and Max had gone missing. I went around our yard trying to find them, but to no avail. It was as if they'd never existed, and I never saw them again. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I was going to pull an all-nighter and look out for anything dangerous or weird that would occur outside. My girl's bedroom was facing the fields, while mine the road, so that night I waited for them to fall asleep, then tiptoed inside and sat still at the window, waiting. I was sitting on my phone, one headphone in my ear, so as not to wake the girls. After midnight, my neck and legs went numb, and after 1 a.m., I began to blink mechanically and yawn every other minute. I was about to give up when I heard a teasing, low howl right under that window. I looked down, and what I saw jolted me awake. Jack was looking straight up, to me. His blue eyes were bloodshot, but I could still see the whites glistening in the moonlight, and he smiled. His smile looked grotesque, a mockery of our human smile, a grin bearing all teeth, and the skin of his face was stretched to make room for all those teeth, white and sharp teeth. That, and he looked taller, almost as if he was standing on his hind legs, looking up at me, and grinning. Panic filled my bloodstream as I couldn't help but sit there frozen, staring at that awful image that is now engraved onto my brain forever. After what seemed like centuries, I turned to Ruby and Jade, and to my phone, hoping he'd go away. I knew there was no way he could get into the house, and I knew that the next day I would call the police. When I looked back outside, he'd disappeared. The next day, he vanished off completely. I'd been left with 5 of my 8 dogs, and I was beginning to fear that the 3 missing had never truly gone away. I feared they were nearby, waiting. I didn't know what they waited for, and I didn't want to give the weird shit that was going around my farm the chance to hurt us. I called the police. When they came, they looked everywhere. My house, my barn, the stables, the basement, the attic. They had found nothing, and were now looking at me compassionately, as if I was some crazy lady who got spooked by living alone. I had nowhere to go, and I couldn't leave the farm, so I stayed. Last night, I was downstairs, playing with Ruby, while Jay was watching TV. Ruby asked for a glass of water, and I went to the kitchen to get one for her. When I came back, I told them that night, they had to go to sleep earlier. They complained, but I managed to get them upstairs. "Mommy, why are you sleeping with us here? There's no room. I'm just cold. Come on, we'll fit into the bed." As I lay with them, my mind raced through the events of the night. How I'd double-checked the locks on all doors and windows. How I'd texted my mother, telling her we'd leave first thing in the morning. How, when I'd gone to the kitchen to get some water, I'd seen Jack's face outside the window, smiling at me. Story number 10. The family that fed me has been dead for years. If I'd stayed in my car that night, I wouldn't have seen the house. I wouldn't have stepped inside. And I wouldn't have to live with what I know now. My car broke down on a lonely stretch of highway, miles from anywhere. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then gave out completely. With no phone signal and no hope of flagging down another car, I started walking. That's when I saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees. It was a house, old and weathered, but warm light spilled from the windows like a beacon. Desperation made me brave. I knocked on the door, and after a long moment, it opened. A man stood there, tall and thin, maybe in his 60s. His kind smile and gentle eyes put me at ease. "Car trouble?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Could I use your phone?" "Of course." "Come in, son. It's not safe out there." The house smelled faintly metallic, like blood covered by bleach. The warmth was stifling, almost oppressive. A woman appeared from the kitchen, thin and pale with a smile that seemed plastered on her face. "Poor thing," she said. "You must be starving. Sit. I'll fix you something to eat while my husband calls for help." She brought me a bowl of stew, thick and dark, with chunks of meat and soft, overcooked vegetables. The first bite made my stomach churn. The meat was tough, rubbery, with a strange aftertaste I couldn't place. "You don't like it?" she asked, her smile faltering. "No, it's good," I lied, forcing another bite. Her smile returned, wider than before. The teenage boy sitting across from me hadn't said a word. He stared, unblinking, with a faint grin that sent chills down my spine. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that house, but politeness kept me in my seat. "I need the bathroom," I said finally, standing too quickly. "Second door on the left," the man said, his eyes narrowing slightly. I walked down the dim hallway, but I didn't stop at the bathroom. A door at the end of the hall caught my attention, slightly ajar, with faint light spilling from within. I don't know what compelled me to open it, but I did. It was a basement. The smell hit me first, thick, sweet, and metallic. The stairs creaked as I descended, and my flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the room. A butcher's table sat in the center, its surface scarred and stained with old blood. Hooks dangled from the ceiling, some empty, others holding scraps of meat. Bones littered the floor, some splintered, some disturbingly intact. A skull rested on a shelf, its hollow eyes staring back at me. The stew I'd eaten rose in my throat. "What are you doing down here?" I spun around to see the man standing at the top of the stairs. His kind smile was gone. I thought this was the bathroom," I stammered. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said softly. Behind him, the wife appeared, her wide smile now twisted into something predatory. The teenage boy stood at her side, holding a long rusted knife. "You can't leave," the man said, stepping closer. Panic took over. I shoved past him, bolting up the stairs and into the hallway. My shoulder hit the front door hard, and I stumbled out into the cold night. Behind me, I heard the wife's laughter. I ran blindly through the trees until I saw headlights. A car slowed, and the driver leaned out the window. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "Help me," I gasped, climbing into the passenger seat. "Please, just get me out of here." The police didn't believe me at first, but I convinced them to check the house. "It's just a few miles back," I said. "You can't miss it. There's a light on the porch." They exchanged a look, and one of them said, "That house burned down 40 years ago. The family died in the fire." "No," I said. "I was just there. I saw them." They drove me to the spot. There was no house, just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. But in the dirt, I found a hook. It was rusted, old, but unmistakable. As we left, I heard it, the wife's laughter, faint and mocking, echoing through the trees.